If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Eleanor Woodward, but most people just call me Elle. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a park ranger in the Shawnee National Forest, Illinois. Every morning I walk these woods, even when the mist is so thick it feels like I'm the only person left in the world. The trees here are old and tall, their branches reaching out like bony fingers, and the ground is always soft under my boots, especially after it rains. I have a limp in my right leg. It's from when I was a kid and got really sick. Polio, the doctor said. But I remember that time differently. I remember crawling through a cave near here, chasing a strange sound, and then waking up days later, burning with fever. Ever since then, my leg's never been the same. It aches the most when I'm deep in the forest, especially near the caves. Sometimes I wonder if the forest remembers me too. This place isn't just my job. It's my whole life. I used to be an anthropology student, obsessed with stories about monsters and old rituals. But when I wrote my big paper about people turning into monsters because of hunger, nobody believed me. They laughed, called it crazy. So I left school and came back, here where the stories live in the trees and the rocks. Today, as I walk my patrol, I notice something strange in the mud. A set of tracks. At first, they look like deer hooves, but then they change. Halfway through, they turn into bare human feet. My heart skips. I've seen tracks like these before, years ago, right before I got sick. I kneel down to look closer. The prints are fresh. Suddenly, the air goes cold. I blink, and for a second, everything changes. The trees are bare, snow covers the ground, and I see shadows moving between the trunks, people in old-fashioned clothes, their faces thin and scared. Then just as quickly, everything snaps back to normal. The mist, the mud, the tracks. My heart hammers in my chest. I keep walking, trying to shake the feeling. I remind myself that I know these woods better than anyone. I know the stories, the old legends about monsters that come out when people are hungry or desperate. But still, I can't help but feel like something is watching me. Near a fallen log, I find something else. Tiny bones, carved and arranged in a pattern. The shapes are just like the ones from my nightmares when I was a kid. I shiver, even though it's not that cold. I know I should turn back, but I can't. Not when the forest is trying to tell me something. I picked up one of the tiny bones, turning it over in my hand. It was smooth and white, almost like it had been cleaned on purpose. The way they were arranged on the ground looked like a star, or maybe a warning sign. I took a picture with my phone just in case. My hands were shaking a little, but I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself it was probably just some animal, or maybe a kid playing a strange game. But as I stood up, I felt a strange buzzing in the air, like when you stand too close to a power line. The hairs on my arms stood up. I looked around, but the woods were quiet, too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. It made my skin crawl. I kept walking, following the tracks deeper into the trees. Every few steps, I'd see something odd. A broken branch, a patch of grass pressed flat, or another strange mark in the mud. It felt like I was being led somewhere, like the forest wanted me to find something. After a while, I reached a part of the woods I didn't visit often. The trees were thicker here, and the sunlight barely made it through the leaves. I could smell something odd, like metal and wet earth. It reminded me of the old stories my grandma used to tell about the bad places in the forest where nothing grew right and animals stayed away. I stopped to catch my breath, listening. That's when I heard it, a faint humming sound, deep and slow, coming from the ground. I knelt and pressed my hand to the dirt. The earth was warm, almost hot. I pulled my hand back quickly. Suddenly, I remembered something from my anthropology days. There were rumors about a spot in these woods where the ground was always warm, even in winter. Some people said it was because of old radiation from a forgotten accident. Others thought it was something stranger, something that changed people if they got too close. I stood up, my heart pounding. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't. Something deep inside me needed to know the truth. I took a deep breath and walked further into the shadows, following the humming sound. The deeper I went, the stranger everything felt. The air was thick, almost hard to breathe, and the humming sound grew louder with each step. It wasn't just noise anymore. It felt like it was inside my head, making my thoughts fuzzy. I tried to focus on the path, but the trees seemed to twist and bend in ways I didn't remember. I checked my watch, but the hands were spinning in circles, not telling the right time. My phone had no signal, and the battery was dropping fast, even though I'd charged it that morning. It was like the forest didn't want me to keep track of time or call for help. As I moved forward, I noticed something even stranger. The shadows on the ground didn't match the trees above. Some of them looked like people standing still and watching me, but when I looked up, there was nothing. There, my skin prickled, and I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. I kept walking, feeling like I was going in circles. The tracks I'd been following were gone now, swallowed up by the soft earth. I tried to remember how to get back, but every tree looked the same. Panic started to creep in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'd been lost before, and I always found my way out. Suddenly, I heard a voice. It was soft and far away, calling my name. Eleanor. I spun around, but I couldn't see anyone. The voice sounded familiar, like someone I knew a long time ago, but I couldn't remember who. My heart thudded in my chest. I took a few shaky steps forward and found myself at the edge of a small clearing. In the middle was a strange, twisted tree with black bark and no leaves. The ground around it was covered in more bones, all arranged in careful patterns. The humming was loudest here, almost painful. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Something about this place felt important, like it was the center of everything strange in the forest. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and stepped into the clearing. As I stepped into the clearing, the humming sound seemed to wrap around me, making my skin tingle. The air felt heavy, like I was underwater. I could see my breath, even though it wasn't cold. The tree in the middle looked even stranger up close. Its bark was cracked and shiny, almost like glass, and there were strange marks scratched into it, symbols I didn't recognize. I knelt down to look at the bones. On the ground, they were small, maybe from birds or squirrels, but some looked bigger, like they could be from a fox or even a deer. Each set of bones was lined up in a neat row, pointing toward the tree. I felt a chill run through me. Someone, or something, had done this on purpose. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The shadows seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice sounded strange in the thick air, almost like it was being swallowed up. No one answered. But then I saw something in the dirt. A small silver locket, half buried near the roots of the tree. I picked it up and brushed off the dirt. When I opened it, I saw a faded picture inside. It was a little girl smiling with a missing front tooth. My heart skipped. I knew that face. It was me when I was about 6 years old. How did my locket get here? I lost it years ago after I got sick. I remembered crying when I couldn't find it, and my mom searching the whole house. But I never thought I'd see it again, especially not in the middle of the forest. The humming grew louder, and the ground under my feet felt like it was moving, almost like it was breathing. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to calm down. When I opened them, the clearing looked different. The trees were bare, and the sky was gray. I could see shadows moving between the trunks. People, but their faces were blurry and sad. I felt a wave of fear, but also a strange pull, like I was supposed to be here. I clutched the locket tight and took a shaky breath, trying to understand what was happening. I stood in the clearing, clutching the locket, my heart pounding in my chest. The world felt strange, like I was halfway between a dream and being awake. The shadows in the trees moved slowly, almost like they were watching me. I tried to call out again, but my voice was weak and shaky. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound from the edge of the clearing. I turned quickly, expecting to see a deer or maybe a lost hiker, but instead I saw a figure step out from behind a tree. It was a woman, tall and thin, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed too bright. She wore old, faded clothes that looked like they belonged to another time. She stared at me for a moment, then spoke in a quiet, careful voice. "You shouldn't be here, Eleanor." My skin prickled. How did she know my name? I tried to speak, but my mouth felt dry. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the tree and the bones on the ground. "This place changes people," she said softly. "It makes them forget who they are. It makes them hungry." I shivered, remembering the stories my grandma used to tell about people who got lost in the woods and never came back the same. I looked down at the locket in my hand. "Did you put this here?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, but you left it here a long time ago when you first came to the forest. You just don't remember." Her words made my head spin. I tried to remember, but everything felt fuzzy and far away. The woman stepped closer, her eyes sad. "You have to leave now before it's too late." I wanted to listen to her, but my feet wouldn't move. The humming was so loud now I could barely think. The woman reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was ice cold. "Please," she whispered, "go." I nodded, finally able to move. I turned and stumbled out of the clearing, not looking back. As I walked, the humming faded, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. I knew I wasn't safe yet. The forest wasn't done with me. I hurried away from the clearing, my legs shaking with every step. The trees seemed to close in around me, and the path I thought I knew so well looked different, almost twisted. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the woman following me, but she was gone. All I could hear was my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. After a while, I stopped to catch my breath. My mind raced with questions. Who was that woman? How did she know me? And what did she mean about the forest changing? People. I looked down at the locket in my hand and tried to remember more about when I was a kid, but my memories felt jumbled, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. As I stood there, I noticed something strange. The air felt warmer, almost like standing near a heater. I looked around and saw a faint glowing light coming from behind a thick patch of bushes. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed through the branches to see what it was. Behind the bushes, I found a small, hidden cave. The entrance was just big enough for me to crawl inside. The warm air was coming from deep within the cave, carrying a strange metallic smell. I hesitated, but something inside me pushed me forward. I got down on my hands and knees and crawled. Inside, the cave was dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw odd shapes on the walls, symbols scratched into the rock, just like the ones on the tree. The humming sound was back, softer now but steady, like a heartbeat. I followed the sound deeper, my fingers tracing the cold stone. Suddenly, I saw something that made me freeze. In the dim light, I spotted a pile of old clothes and shoes, covered in dust. Some looked like they had been there for years. My stomach twisted. These belonged to people who had come here before me and never left. I backed away, my heart pounding. I needed to get out, but as I turned, I saw a flicker of movement at the cave entrance. For a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But then I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, coming closer. I pressed myself against the rough wall of the cave, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My heart was beating so loud, I was sure whoever or whatever was coming would hear it. The footsteps echoed in the small space, slow and steady, crunching on the loose stones. A shadow stretched across the cave floor. I held my breath, not daring to move. Then a figure ducked inside. It was a man, but he looked strange. His hair was wild and tangled, and his clothes were dirty and torn. His eyes were wide and bright, almost glowing in the darkness. He stopped and sniffed the air like an animal searching for food. I tried to make myself as small as possible, hoping he wouldn't see me, but then his head snapped in my direction. For a moment, we just stared at each other. He spoke, his voice rough and shaky. "Are you real?" he asked, blinking like he hadn't seen another person in years. I nodded, too scared to speak. He crawled closer, moving strangely, almost like he'd forgotten how to walk. Up close, I could see his skin was pale and thin, stretched tight over his bones. He looked hungry, really hungry. He reached out a hand but stopped when he saw the locket around my neck. His eyes grew wide with fear. "You have to leave," he whispered. "It's not safe here. The forest, it changes you. It changed me." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "What happened to you?" He shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I got lost a long time ago. I heard the humming just like you. I thought I could find my way out, but the longer I stayed, the more I forgot. My name, my family, even what I looked like." He pointed to the pile of old clothes. "They all got lost too. We're stuck, unless someone finds a way to break the spell." I felt a wave of sadness and fear. Was this what would happen to me if I stayed? Would I forget who I was too? I knew I had to get out, but I also wanted to help him. "I'll try," I whispered. "I'll try to break the spell." He nodded, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "Hurry," he said, "before you forget too." I crawled out of the cave as fast as I could, my heart pounding. The air outside felt cooler, but the humming was still there, following me like a shadow. I looked back once and saw the man watching me from the darkness, his eyes full of hope and fear. I stood up and tried to remember the way back, but the forest looked different. The trees seemed taller and closer together, and the sky was a strange, dull grey. I checked my phone again, but it was dead now. I felt alone, but I kept moving, holding the locket tightly in my hand. As I walked, I started to feel dizzy. My thoughts were getting fuzzy, and I had to say my name out loud to remind myself who I was. "My name is Eleanor. My name is Eleanor," I whispered over and over. Suddenly I heard voices, not just one, but many, all around me. They were whispering things I couldn't quite understand. Some sounded scared, others angry, and a few just sad. I realized they were coming from the trees themselves, like the forest was alive and full of memories. I saw flashes of people, men, women, even children, moving between the trunks. Their faces were pale and lost. Some reached out to me, but when I tried to touch them, my hand passed right through. They were like ghosts stuck in the forest, just like the man in the cave. I kept walking, even though my legs felt heavy. I knew I had to find the clearing with the strange tree again. Maybe that was the center of everything, the place where the spell could be broken. The voices grew louder as I got closer. They begged me to help them, to remember who I was, to not give in to the forest. I promised I would try, even though I was scared. Finally, I saw the clearing up ahead. The tree stood in the middle, black and twisted, just like before. The humming was so loud now it hurt my ears. I took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing, ready to face whatever came next. As I entered the clearing again, everything felt sharper and more real. The strange tree looked even darker, and the patterns of bones around it seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. My head was spinning, but I forced myself to focus. I remembered what the man in the cave had said. There was a spell here, and I had to break it. The voices in the air grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. They were crying, whispering, begging for help. I clutched the locket, hoping it would keep me anchored to who I was. I tried to block out the noise and think. What could I do? I walked up to the tree and touched its rough, cold bark. The symbols scratched into it seemed to move under my fingers, shifting and changing. Suddenly, I remembered something from when I was a little girl. My grandma telling me that names had power, that saying your name out loud could protect you from getting lost. So I stood as tall as I could and said, "My name is Eleanor Woodward. I'm not afraid. I will not forget who I am." The humming grew even louder, almost shaking the ground. The bones around the tree rattled, and the shadows in the clearing twisted and writhed. I was scared, but I kept going, repeating my name, over and over. Eleanor, Eleanor, Eleanor. Suddenly the locket in my hand grew warm. I opened it and looked at the picture inside. Me as a little girl, smiling. I remembered how happy I was back then, before I got sick, before I lost myself, in these woods. I held on to that memory as tightly as I could. The air around me started to change. The grey sky lightened, and the voices faded, replaced by a deep, peaceful silence. The tree's bark softened under my hand, and the symbols stopped moving. I felt a wave of calm wash over me, and for the first time since I entered the forest, I felt safe. I knew I was breaking the spell, not just for me, but for everyone lost in these woods. As the calm settled over the clearing, I took a shaky breath and looked around. The tree didn't seem so scary anymore. The bones on the ground stopped glowing, and the shadows faded away. For a moment it was just me, standing in the quiet, holding my locket. But then I noticed something moving at the edge of the clearing. The woman with the long, dark hair stepped out of the trees, her eyes soft and kind this time. Behind her, the man from the cave appeared, looking tired but hopeful. More figures followed, men, women, and children, all the lost people I'd seen, in the woods. They were all watching me, waiting. The woman walked up to me and smiled. "You did it, Eleanor," she said gently. "You remembered who you are. That's all it takes to break the forest's hold." I felt tears in my eyes, but I smiled back. "Will you all be okay now?" I asked. She nodded. "We can go home now. You set us free." One by one, the figures began to fade, their faces peaceful. The man from the cave gave me a grateful look before he disappeared, and the woman squeezed my hand, her touch warm this time. Soon, I was alone in the clearing again. The sky cleared and sunlight poured through the trees. The forest felt lighter, friendlier, like it was finally letting go of its secrets. I looked at the locket in my hand and closed it gently, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I turned and walked out of the clearing, following a path that seemed to open up just for me. The birds started singing again, and the air smelled fresh and clean. I knew I would never forget this day, or the lesson the forest had taught me. As I reached the edge of the woods, I looked back one last time. The clearing was empty, but I could feel the forest watching me, almost like it was saying thank you. I stepped out into the sunlight, ready to go home, my heart full of hope. My name is Victor Mercer. I work as a park ranger in the Olympic National Forest out in Washington. People say it's one of the most beautiful places in the country. Tall trees, thick green moss, and mist that hangs in the air like a secret. Some mornings, when the sun rises and the fog rolls over the hills, it feels like the whole world is holding its breath. I like those quiet moments. They help keep my mind calm. I've seen a lot of things in my life, some good, some bad, and some I wish I could forget. Out here, I can almost pretend the past doesn't follow me. Almost. That morning, I started my day like any other. I put on my uniform, laced my boots, and stepped outside. The air was cool and smelled like pine needles. As I walked along the narrow trail behind the ranger station, I listened to the birds singing. It should have felt peaceful, but something was off. I couldn't say what, not yet. Maybe it was the way the shadows moved between the trees, or how the wind sounded like it was whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. I tried to shake off the feeling and kept walking. My friend Howard, Another ranger was waiting for me at the station with hot coffee. He's been working here longer than anyone. He always tells stories about the forest, some funny, some strange. Today, he watched me a little too closely, like he was waiting to see if I'd noticed something he already knew. We sat on the porch, drinking our coffee. I looked out at the trees, and for a moment, I saw a doe and her fawn standing perfectly still, staring right at me. They didn't move, not even when I waved. It was like they were frozen, or maybe listening to something I couldn't hear. When I finally walked toward them, they bolted into the woods. I felt dizzy just for a second. The world seemed to twist, and for a heartbeat, the forest looked different, older somehow. I blinked, and everything went back to normal. That's when I found the first sign. In a small clearing, the grass was dead in a perfect circle, like someone had drawn it with a giant compass. Frost sparkled on the ground, even though it was summer. The shadows in the circle didn't match the sun. They moved on their own, sliding across the frost like they were alive. I stood there, heart pounding, and wondered if I was seeing things. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Stared at that strange circle for a long time. My hands felt cold, even though the sun was shining. I knelt down and touched the frost. It was real, cold and wet, just like regular ice, but it shouldn't have been there, not in July. I looked around to see if anyone else was nearby. The forest was quiet. Too quiet, really. Even the birds had stopped singing. I felt like I was being watched, but when I turned, there was nothing but trees and shadows. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the circle. I thought about calling Howard, but I didn't want him to think I was being silly. Maybe there was a simple reason for what I saw. Maybe some kind of cold air had settled in that spot. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I walked back to the station, my boots crunching on the gravel. Howard was inside, looking through some old maps. He glanced up when I came in. "Find anything interesting?" He asked, trying to sound casual. I hesitated. "There's a weird patch of frost out by the clearing," I said. "It's shaped like a perfect circle." Howard's face changed. He set his coffee down and looked at me closely. "Did you touch it?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up and closed the door. That made me nervous. Howard never closed the door unless something serious was going on. He lowered his voice. "Victor, sometimes this forest does things that don't make sense. You need to be careful. If you see anything else strange, you come straight to me. Don't go poking around by yourself." I wanted to ask more, but he just shook his head and went back to his maps. I could tell he was worried, and that made me worry too. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that circle of frost and the way the shadows moved inside it. I kept thinking about what Howard said. What did he know that I didn't? And what was really happening in these woods? I promised myself I'd find out no matter what. The next morning I woke up early. The sky was grey and a light mist hung over the trees. I couldn't stop thinking about the frost circle. I ate a quick breakfast, grabbed my flashlight and notebook, and headed back to the clearing. The forest felt different today. Every sound seemed louder, the crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig, the distant call of a crow. I kept looking over, my shoulder half expecting to see someone following me, but there was no one, just me and the trees. When I reached the clearing, the frost was gone. The grass looked normal, but I could still see the outline of the circle, like a faint scar on the earth. I knelt down and ran my fingers over it. The ground felt colder than the rest of the clearing. Took out my notebook and drew the circle, marking where I'd found it. As I stood up, something caught my eye, a small, shiny object half buried at the edge of the circle. I brushed away the dirt and found an old key. It was rusty and heavy, with strange markings on it. I turned it over in my hand, trying to figure out where it came from. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. My heart jumped. I spun around, but it was just Howard. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. "Did you find something?" he asked quietly. I showed him the key. He stared at it for a long time, then sighed. "That's not supposed to be here," he said. "This forest, it keeps secrets. Sometimes things show up that don't belong." I wanted to ask him more, but he just shook his head. "Let's go back," he said. "It's not safe to stay here too long." As we walked back to the station, I kept glancing at the key in my hand. I felt like I was holding a piece of a puzzle I didn't understand. Howard was silent the whole way, and I could tell he was thinking hard about something. That night, I locked the key in my desk drawer. I lay in bed, listening to the wind in the trees, and wondered what other secrets the forest was hiding. I knew I had to find out, even if it scared me. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the key. It felt heavy in my pocket, like it was waiting for me to do something with it. I kept looking at the strange markings, tracing them with my finger, but I couldn't figure out what they meant. After my morning rounds, I decided to ask Howard about the key. When I found him, he was sitting outside, staring into the trees. He looked even more tired than before. "Howard," I said, "do you know what this key is for?" He didn't answer right away. He just took the key from me and turned it over in his hands. Finally, he spoke. "A long time ago, before I started working here, there was a family that lived near the edge of the forest. The father was a caretaker, just like us. One day he disappeared. Nobody ever found him, but people said he left behind a locked box. They say it holds the truth about what happened to him." I felt a chill run down my back. "Do you think this key opens that box?" I asked. Howard shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe it's just another piece of the forest's puzzle." I wanted to know more, but Howard stood up and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I put the key back in my pocket and decided to look for the box myself. That afternoon, I searched the old caretaker's cabin. It was falling apart, covered in moss and vines. Inside, it smelled like damp earth and old wood. I looked everywhere, under the floorboards, behind the shelves, even inside the fireplace. At last, I found a small metal box hidden behind a brick in the wall. My hands shook as I fit the key into the lock. It turned with a loud click. Inside the box, there was a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellow and brittle, filled with neat, careful writing. As I flipped through the journal, I realized it was the caretaker's diary. The last few pages were different. The writing was messy, almost like he was in a hurry or scared. He wrote about strange things happening in the forest, cold spots, shadows that moved, and voices calling his name at night. I closed the journal and looked around the empty cabin. The air felt colder, and I could hear the wind howling outside. I knew I had found something important, but I also knew I was in deeper than I'd ever planned. I left the old cabin with the caretaker's journal tucked safely under my arm. The sky was getting dark, and the wind was picking up. Every step I took, the trees seemed to lean in closer, like they were listening to my thoughts. Back at the ranger station, I sat at my desk and started reading the journal from the beginning. The first pages were normal, stories about the caretakers. Daily work, fixing fences, feeding animals, and watching the weather. But as I kept reading, the entries changed. He wrote about strange cold spots in the woods, just like the one I found. He talked about hearing whispers at night, voices that sounded like his own family calling for help. One entry made my heart pound. He wrote, "The shadows in the clearing are moving again. I saw something standing in the frost, watching me. I'm afraid to go outside after dark." I looked up from the journal and stared out the window. The forest was quiet, but I felt like something was out there, waiting. I turned back to the last page. The caretaker's writing was shaky. He wrote, "If you find this, please be careful. The forest remembers everything. It keeps secrets, and it doesn't like to let them go." I closed the journal and sat back in my chair. My mind was racing. Was the caretaker still out there, lost in the woods? Or had something happened to him? Something the forest wanted to keep hidden? I thought about telling Howard, but I wasn't sure what to say. Would he believe me, or would he just tell me to leave it alone? That night, I put the journal under my pillow. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the frost circle and the shadows moving inside it. I felt like I was being watched, even in my own room. I knew I couldn't ignore what I'd found. The forest was trying to tell me something, and I had to listen, no matter how scared I was. The next morning, I woke up feeling tired and uneasy. I kept thinking about the caretaker's words, how the forest remembers everything. I got dressed and made myself a cup of coffee, but my hands were shaking so much I almost spilled it. Howard noticed right away. "Rough night?" he asked. I nodded. "I found the caretaker's journal," I said quietly. "He wrote about the same things I've been seeing, the frost, the shadows." He was scared. Howard's face grew serious. He sat down across from me. "Victor, there are things in these woods that can't be explained. I've seen them too. Most people just ignore it and hope it goes away. But you keep digging." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to stop, to pretend nothing was wrong. But another part of me needed answers. "Did you ever see the shadows yourself?" I asked. Howard nodded slowly. "A few times. They always show up when something bad is about to happen. I think the caretaker tried to warn us, but nobody listened." Sat in silence for a while. The only sound was the wind rattling the windows. Finally, Howard spoke again. "If you're going to keep looking, you shouldn't do it alone. Promise me you'll tell me if you find anything else." I promised, even though I wasn't sure it would help. I felt like the forest was pulling me in deeper, showing me things I wasn't meant to see. Later that day, I went back to the clearing. The circle was still there, faint but visible. I stood in the middle, listening. For a moment I thought I heard someone whisper my name. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart pounded in my chest. I left the clearing and hurried back to the station, feeling like the shadows were following me. I knew I couldn't turn back now. Whatever was happening in these woods, I had to see it through to the end. That night, the wind howled louder than ever. The trees creaked and groaned, and every shadow in my room seemed to move when I wasn't looking. I tried to read the caretaker's journal again, hoping I'd missed something, but the words just made me more nervous. Suddenly, I heard a knock at my door. I jumped, my heart racing. When I opened it, Howard was standing there, his face pale. "Victor, come with me," he whispered. "Something's happening." We hurried outside. The air was cold and sharp, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. Howard led me through the trees with only a flashlight to guide us. The beam of light shook in his hand. We reached the clearing. This time, the frost circle was back, brighter and bigger than before. The grass inside the circle was covered in ice, and in the middle stood a dark shape. It looked almost like a person, but I couldn't see its face. It didn't move or make a sound. Howard grabbed my arm. "Don't go any closer," he said, his voice trembling. "That's what the caretaker saw. That's what took him." I stared at the shape, frozen with fear. The shadows around it seemed to stretch and twist, reaching out toward us. I could feel something cold and heavy pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the shape faded away. The frost melted, and the clearing looked normal again, but I knew nothing was normal anymore. Howard and I hurried back to the station. Neither of us spoke. I could tell he was just as scared as I was. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark shape standing in the frost, waiting. I knew the forest was trying to show me something, and I was more afraid than ever to find out what it was. The next day, I felt like I was walking through a dream. Everything seemed quiet, almost too quiet, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Howard barely said a word all morning. He just kept looking out the window, his face tight with worry. I tried to focus on my normal work, but I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. That dark shape in the frost circle, it didn't feel like a person. It felt like something old, something that belonged to the forest itself. Around noon, a black SUV pulled up to the ranger station. 2 men in suits got out. They didn't look like hikers or campers. They walked straight up to Howard and me, flashing badges. "We're with the government," one of them said. "We need to ask you some questions about strange events in this area." My stomach dropped. How did they know? I glanced at Howard, but he just nodded, like he'd been expecting this. The men asked about the frost circles, the shadows, and if we'd seen anything unusual. I tried to keep my answers simple, but I could tell they already knew more than they let on. After they left, Howard finally spoke. "They come around every few years, whenever the forest starts acting up. They never find anything, but they always warn us to stay away from the strange spots." I felt a chill run down my back. If even the government was worried, then this was bigger than I thought. That night I sat alone in my room, staring at the caretaker's journal. I wondered if he'd ever met those men in suits, or if he'd tried to warn them too. I felt more alone than ever, but I also knew I couldn't ignore what was happening. The forest wanted me to see something, and I was running out of time to figure out what it was. That evening, I sat on my bed with the caretaker's journal open on my lap. I read the last few pages again and again, hoping for a clue. The words felt heavy, like a warning meant just for me. Suddenly I remembered something, the old library in the ranger station basement. Hardly anyone went down there. It was full of dusty books and boxes of old records. Maybe there was something down there that could help me understand what was happening. I grabbed my flashlight and headed downstairs. The basement smelled musty and cold. My footsteps echoed as I walked between the shelves. I searched through old maps, newspaper clippings, and faded photographs. Most of it was boring, but then I found a folder marked Unexplained Events. Inside were reports from other rangers, some written decades ago. They described the same things I'd seen: frost circles, moving shadows, and strange whispers in the woods. One report even mentioned the caretaker by name. It said he'd been looking for answers, just like me. I felt a mix of fear and relief. I wasn't the only one who'd seen these things. The forest had been hiding secrets for a long time. As I put the folder back, I heard a soft sound behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move between the shelves. My heart pounded in my chest. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. No one answered. The basement was silent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I hurried back upstairs, locking the basement door behind me. I sat in the kitchen with the journal and the folder, trying to calm down. The forest was full of secrets, and now I was sure it was watching me. I knew I was getting closer to the truth, but I was also more scared than ever. Whatever was hiding. In the woods, it didn't want to be found. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping on my window. The sky was dark, and the whole forest seemed even more mysterious. I kept thinking about the reports I'd found in the basement and the shadow I thought I saw down there. I felt like the forest was getting closer, pressing in on me from all sides. Howard came into the kitchen while I was making toast. He looked at me, his eyes tired but kind. "You look like you didn't sleep much," he said. "I didn't," I admitted. "Howard, I found old reports in the basement. Other rangers saw the same things. Frost circles, shadows, all of it. Why does this keep happening?" Howard sighed and sat down across from me. "This forest is old, Victor. Older than any of us. Some people think it remembers everything that ever happened here. Sometimes it shows us things we're not supposed to see." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "What do we do?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We watch, we listen, and we try to stay safe. But if you feel like the forest is calling you, don't go alone. Promise me." I promised. But deep down, I knew I'd have to face whatever was out there. I couldn't walk away. Now. Later that day, I went back to the clearing one more time. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet. The circle was there, clearer than ever, and the air inside it felt cold and heavy. I stood at the edge, listening. For a moment, I heard a voice, a whisper so soft I almost missed it. It sounded like my own name. I took a step back, heart pounding. I knew the forest was trying to tell me something, and I was running out of time to figure out what it was. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the voice I'd heard in the clearing. It sounded so real, like someone was standing right behind me, whispering my name. I kept checking over my shoulder, even inside my own room. Howard must have noticed how jumpy I was because he knocked on my door after dinner. "Victor," he said quietly, "I think it's time we try something." He handed me a small, old-fashioned lantern. My grandfather used to say that light keeps the forest's secrets away, at least for a little while. "If you go back to the clearing, take this with you." I nodded, feeling both scared and hopeful. Maybe the lantern would help. Maybe it wouldn't, but I was willing to try anything. Late that night, when the moon was high, I walked back to the clearing with the lantern in my hand. The glass glowed with a warm, steady light. The forest was silent except for my footsteps and the soft rustle of leaves. When I reached the circle, I stood just outside the edge and held up the lantern. The shadows inside the circle seemed to pull back, like they were afraid of the light. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. As soon as I crossed into the circle, the air grew even colder. My breath came out in white puffs. I held the lantern high, and for a moment I saw shapes moving in the shadows, faces, hands, and eyes watching me from the darkness. Then I heard the voice again, clearer this time. "Help me," it whispered. It sounded scared and lonely, like a lost child. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. There was no answer, just the sound of the wind and the feeling that something was waiting for me to understand. I left the clearing as quickly as I could, my heart racing. I knew now that the forest wasn't just showing me strange things. It was asking for help, and I was the only one who could hear its call. The next morning I felt different. I was scared, but I also knew I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. The forest needed help, and somehow I was part of it now. I told Howard everything, the voices, the shapes, the feeling that something was trapped in the clearing. He listened without interrupting, his face serious. After a long silence, he said, "I think you're right, Victor. Something is stuck here. Maybe it's been here for a long time, ever since the caretaker disappeared." I nodded. "But what can we do?" Howard thought for a moment. "Maybe there's a way to set it free. My grandfather used to talk about old rituals, ways to help lost spirits move on. He said you have to show them you're not afraid and that you want to help." I felt a chill, but I knew we had to try. Howard and I gathered what we could: the lantern, the caretaker's journal, and a small bell that Howard said was important for the ritual. That night, we walked together to the clearing. The moon was bright and the air was cold. We stood at the edge of the circle, holding hands so we wouldn't get separated. Howard rang the bell softly, and I read out loud from the caretaker's journal. I told the forest we wanted to help, that we weren't there to harm anyone. At first, nothing happened. Then, the shadows in the circle started to swirl and twist. The cold grew stronger, and I heard the voice again, crying out for help. I held up the lantern, letting its light shine into the darkness. "You're not alone," I said, my voice steady. "We're here. We want to help you find peace." The shadows paused, and for a moment I saw a face in the mist. A sad, tired face that looked almost human. Then, slowly, the cold faded. The shadows drifted away, and the clearing felt lighter, almost warm. Howard and I stood there in silence, not sure if it was over. But deep down, I felt like we'd done something good. Maybe, just maybe, we had helped the forest let go of one of its oldest secrets. After that night, everything seemed different. The forest felt calmer, like it was finally able to breathe again. The frost circle was gone, and the grass in the clearing started to grow back, green and soft. Even the birds returned, singing in the mornings like nothing strange had ever happened. Howard and I didn't talk much about what we'd done, but there was a quiet understanding between us. We both knew we'd seen something real, something most people would never believe. Still, we kept the caretaker's journal safe, just in case anyone ever needed to know the truth. A few days later, I went back to the clearing by myself. I stood where the frost circle had been and listened. The air was warmer, and the only sound was the wind moving gently through the trees. I felt a sense of peace, but also a little sadness, like saying goodbye to an old friend. I thought about the face I'd seen in the mist, how lonely and tired it looked. I hoped, wherever that spirit had gone, it had finally found rest. As I walked back to the ranger station, I realized something important. The forest would always have its secrets, but now I wasn't afraid of them. I knew that sometimes the scariest things just needed someone to listen and care. Howard met me at the porch with 2 cups of coffee. He smiled, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like everything was going to be okay. I sat down beside him, looking out at the trees. The sun was shining, and the world felt safe again. For now, the forest was quiet, but I knew I would always be ready to listen if it ever needed help again. My name is Evelyn Patterson, but everyone calls me Eve. I work as a park ranger in the Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania. Most days I walk the trails early in the morning before the sun has burned off the mist. The forest is quiet then, except for birds and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I'm not like other rangers. There's something different about the way I see the world. When I look at a path, it doesn't just look like dirt and rocks to me. I see colors floating in the air, like someone painted invisible lines that only I can follow. Sometimes I even smell these colors, sweet, sharp, or sour, depending on where the trail leads. I didn't always have this strange sense. It started when I was a kid, after something happened in the caves near my old home. My parents called it synesthesia, when the doctors couldn't explain it. All I know is, it helps me do my job, even if it makes me feel like an outsider. Today, the air feels heavy and my chest is tight. I always get this way before something bad happens. Maybe it's because of what happened to my old team in Colorado. Or maybe it's just the forest trying to warn me. I try to shake off the feeling and focus on my patrol. As I walk, I notice something odd. There's a patch of dead grass ahead, shaped like a perfect square. The edges are too straight, too clean, like someone cut it out with a ruler. When I move to the side, the shape changes. It looks like a triangle now, then a circle from another angle. I blink and rub my eyes, but the shape stays. The colors around it are all wrong, gray and cold, with a sharp metallic smell that makes my head hurt. I kneel down and touch the ground. The dirt feels normal, but my senses scream that something is off. I look around, but there's no sign of animals or people, just the strange shape, sitting in the middle of the clearing, daring me to figure it out. I stand up and take a deep breath. My heart is pounding, but I can't walk away. I have to know what's causing this. I follow the weird colors and smells, hoping they'll lead me to an answer. Every step I take, the world feels just a little less normal, and that's when my story really begins. I kept moving, following the strange trail only I could see. The colors in the air twisted and turned, sometimes bright, sometimes dull and gray. The smell changed too. Now it was like old pennies mixed with rain. My legs felt heavy, but I pushed on. careful not to make too much noise. After a while, the trees grew closer together. The sunlight barely made it through the thick leaves. I heard a branch snap behind me and spun around, heart thumping, but it was just a squirrel darting up a tree. I let out a shaky breath and tried to calm myself. The trail didn't follow any path I knew. It zigzagged between rocks and roots, leading me deeper into the forest. I passed a big boulder with strange marks on it, lines and shapes that looked almost like writing, but not any language I'd ever seen. I reached out to touch it, but the colors around it flashed bright red, and I pulled my hand back fast. Something told me not to mess with it. I checked my radio, but there was only static, no signal. I tried not to panic. I'd been in the woods plenty of times before, and I knew how to find my way back. Still, something about today felt different. The air was too still, and the birds had stopped singing. I kept following the trail. Soon, I reached a spot where the ground dipped down, almost like a shallow bowl. In the middle was a pile of rocks, stacked in a neat tower. The colors around it were swirling fast, and the smell was so sharp it made my eyes water. I crouched down and looked closer. There was something shiny stuck between the rocks. I reached in and pulled out a small metal tag. It was old and rusty, but I could just make out the letters, HP. That was strange. My friend Henry, another ranger, had those initials. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I jumped up and spun around, ready to yell, but it was just Henry, looking pale and worried. "Eve, what are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice shaky. I showed him the tag. "I found this. Are you missing yours?" He stared at it, then shook his head. "No, I have mine right here." He pulled his own tag from his pocket. That one belonged to my dad. He disappeared in these woods years ago." A cold chill ran down my back. The colors around us flickered, and the smell grew even stronger. I knew deep down that we had just found the start of something much bigger and much scarier than either of us expected. Henry stared at the old tag in my hand, his face pale as paper. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The woods felt too quiet, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I tried to sound brave. "Henry, did your dad ever talk about this part of the forest?" He shook his head slowly. "He always told me to stay away from here, said it was dangerous. I thought he just didn't want me wandering off when I was a kid." He looked around, eyes wide and searching. "But he was scared, Eve. I could and tell." I swallowed hard. The colors in the air were swirling faster now, almost dizzying. The sharp metallic smell was so strong it made my nose sting. I wanted to leave, but something deep inside told me we had to keep going. Henry took a shaky breath. "We should mark our trail, just in case." He tied a red ribbon from his pack to a low branch. I nodded, glad for the idea. We walked on, moving slowly, careful not to trip on the roots and rocks. The strange trail I could see was still there, winding ahead like a ribbon no one else could see. Henry followed me, trusting my sense, even though he couldn't see what I saw. After a few minutes, we came to a place where the ground sloped down into a narrow gap between two big rocks. The air was colder here, and the light felt dim, even. Though it was still morning, I could feel my heart beating faster. There was something odd about the space between the rocks. It looked like a normal gap, but the colors around it were swirling in tight circles, almost like a whirlpool. The smell was so strong, I had to cover my nose. Henry noticed too. "Do you see that?" he whispered. I nodded. "It's not right. It feels wrong." He picked up a stick and tossed it into the gap. For a second, nothing happened. Then the stick seemed to vanish, like it had fallen into a hole that wasn't really there. We looked at each other, both scared but too curious to turn back. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, peering into the gap. It was dark inside, but I thought I saw something move, just a flicker, like a shadow slipping away. Henry grabbed my arm. "Eve, Maybe we should go back. I wanted to agree, but I shook my head. We have to find out what's going on. If your dad disappeared here, maybe we can find out why. He nodded, even though he looked scared. Together, we squeezed through the gap, stepping into the darkness beyond. The air felt thick and heavy, and the swirling colors grew brighter, lighting our way. As we moved deeper, I knew we were leaving the normal world behind. Whatever was waiting for us in the shadows, we were about to find out. The space inside the rocks was tighter than I expected. I had to turn sideways and shuffle my feet to fit through. Henry squeezed in behind me, his breath quick and nervous. The air was cold and smelled even more like metal and rain. After a few steps, the gap opened, up into a small cave. The ceiling was low and the walls were covered with strange marks, lines, circles, and shapes scratched into the stone. Some looked fresh, like someone had made them not long ago. I ran my fingers over one of the marks. It was cold and rough. The colors in the air were swirling around the marks, glowing a soft blue. I could almost hear a faint humming sound, like a faraway song. Henry shined his flashlight around the cave. The beam landed on something in the corner, a small pile of old clothes and a broken backpack. My heart skipped a beat. The backpack was faded, but I could see the letters HP stitched on the side. Henry's voice was shaky. That's my dad's pack. He always took it with him when he went hiking. I knelt down and looked through the pile. There was a notebook inside, the pages yellow and worn. I flipped through it, but most of the writing was just scribbles and strange drawings. On one page, there was a map of the forest with a big X marked near where we were standing. Henry looked over my shoulder. He must have been trying to find something, or maybe trying to get away from something. I nodded, my hands shaking a little. The humming sound was louder now, and the colors in the air were spinning faster. I felt dizzy, but I didn't want to stop. Suddenly, we heard a noise from deeper in the cave. It sounded like footsteps, slow and heavy, echoing off the stone walls. Henry grabbed my arm. Did you hear that? I nodded, my mouth dry. We're not alone. We pressed ourselves against the wall, trying to stay quiet. The footsteps got closer, then stopped. I held my breath, listening. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from the darkness, a voice whispered, "Help me." It was faint, but I knew it wasn't Henry. The voice sounded tired and scared, like someone who had been lost for a long time. Henry's eyes were wide. That sounded like my dad. I wanted to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. We have to see who it is. We moved slowly, deeper into the cave, following the sound of the voice. The colors in the air were swirling faster than ever, and the humming was now a low, steady song in my ears. I didn't know what we would find, but I knew we couldn't turn back now. We walked deeper into the cave, our footsteps echoing softly. The voice called out again, a little louder this time. "Help me, please." It sounded weak, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. Henry squeezed my hand. I could feel him shaking, but I was scared too. The colors in the air were spinning so fast now they almost looked like a storm. The humming sound was louder, but it still felt far away, like it was coming from inside the rocks. We turned a corner and saw a small tunnel leading even deeper underground. The air was colder here, and I could see my breath in front of my face. Henry pointed his flashlight down the tunnel, and for a second I thought I saw a shadow move. We followed the tunnel, moving slowly. The ground was slippery, and I almost fell a couple of times. At the end of the tunnel there was a small room. In the middle of the room sat a man, hunched over, his back to us. His clothes were dirty and torn, and his hair was long and messy. Henry let go of my hand and took a step forward. "Dad," he whispered. The man turned around slowly. His face was pale, and his eyes looked tired and confused. For a moment, he just stared at us, like he wasn't sure if we were real. Henry ran too, him and hugged him tight. The man didn't move at first, but then he hugged Henry back, holding on like he never wanted to let go. I stood back, watching them. I felt a lump in my throat. I was happy for Henry, but something still didn't feel right. The colors in the air were still swirling and the humming sound hadn't stopped. Henry's dad looked at me. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "It's not safe. There's something in these caves, something watching." I felt a chill run down my back. "What do you mean? What's down here?" He shook his head. "I don't know. I hear it moving sometimes. I see shadows that don't belong. I try to leave, but the tunnels always change. I get lost no matter which way I go." Henry looked at me, his eyes scared. "Eve, what do we do?" I took a deep breath and tried to sound brave. "We're going to get out of here. We'll stick together and follow the way we came." But as I turned to look back down the tunnel, I realized something terrible. The way we came was gone. The tunnel behind us now led somewhere else, twisting off into darkness I didn't recognize. We were trapped, and I knew deep down that whatever was in these caves was getting closer. I tried not to panic, but my hands were shaking. The tunnel behind us was gone, replaced by a wall of rock. The only way out now was a narrow path leading deeper into the cave. The colors in the air were spinning so fast it made my head hurt. The humming sound was louder, almost like a warning. Henry held his dad's hand tightly. "We'll find a way out, Dad. I promise." His dad nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He looked around as if he expected something to jump out at us any second. We started walking down the new tunnel. The walls felt closer now, and I had to duck my head in some places. My flashlight flickered, making the shadows dance. Every sound seemed too loud, our footsteps, our breathing, even the drip of water from the ceiling. After a while, we came to a place where the tunnel split in two. One path was wide and smooth, with a faint light at the end. The other was narrow and dark, with strange marks scratched into the stone. Henry looked at me. "Which way do we go?" I closed my eyes and tried to focus on the colors and smells. The wide tunnel smelled sweet, almost like flowers, but the colors were dull and gray. The narrow tunnel smelled sharp and cold, but the colors were bright and swirling just like before. I pointed to the narrow tunnel. "I think we should go this way. The colors are stronger." Henry nodded, trusting me. We squeezed into the narrow tunnel, moving slowly. The marks on the walls glowed faintly in my flashlight beam. I traced one with my finger, and it felt warm, almost alive. Suddenly we heard a noise behind us, a scraping, shuffling sound, like something dragging itself along the ground. We froze, listening. The sound got closer, echoing in the tight space. Henry's dad whispered, "Don't look back. Just keep moving." We hurried forward, trying not to make any noise. The tunnel twisted and turned, and I started to worry we'd never find our way out. But the colors in the air kept leading me forward, brighter and brighter with every step. Finally, we saw a crack of light up ahead. I rushed toward it, heart pounding. We squeezed through the opening and found ourselves in a huge underground room. The ceiling was so high I couldn't see the top, and the walls were covered in more of those strange glowing marks. We were safe for now, but I knew deep down that whatever was following us was still out there, waiting in the shadows. We stood in the middle of the big underground room, catching our breath. The light here was soft and blue, coming from the marks on the walls. It felt almost peaceful, but I couldn't relax. My heart was still racing, and the humming sound was still in my ears, quieter now but always there. Henry's dad sat down on a flat rock, looking tired. Henry sat beside him, holding his hand. I walked around the room, shining my flashlight on the walls. The marks were everywhere, some big, some small, all twisting and turning in strange patterns. I wondered who made them and why. I stopped at one mark that looked different from the others. It was shaped like a door, with a handle scratched into the stone. The colors around it were swirling faster than anywhere else in the room. I reached out and touched it. The stone felt warm, almost like it was alive. Suddenly the humming got louder and the colors flashed bright red. I pulled my hand back, scared. Henry and his dad looked up at me. "Did you find something?" Henry asked. "I think so," I said, my voice shaky. "This mark, it feels different, like it's important." Henry's dad stood up and walked over to me. He touched the mark too, and for a second the whole room seemed to shake. The humming sound turned into a low, deep voice, speaking words I didn't understand. We all stepped back, staring at the wall. The mark started to glow, brighter and brighter, until it hurt my eyes to look at it. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the light faded. The mark was still there, but now it looked like a real door, with a handle that shined in the blue light. Henry looked at me, his eyes wide. "Should we open it?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to run away, but another part of me wanted to know what was behind that door. I took a deep breath and nodded. Henry reached out and grabbed the handle. It was cold and smooth. He looked at me one last time, then slowly turned it. The door opened with a soft creak and a rush of cold air hit us. Inside, I saw another tunnel, this one lined with more glowing marks. The colors in the air were swirling faster than ever, and the humming sound was now a steady song. We stepped through the door, not knowing what we would find. I just hoped, whatever was waiting for us, we could face it together. The new tunnel was different from the others. The walls were smooth and shiny, almost like glass. The glowing marks were everywhere, lighting up the path ahead. It felt colder here, and my breath made little clouds in the air. We walked slowly, listening for any sounds. The humming was louder now, but it didn't feel scary anymore. It almost felt like the tunnel was singing to us, guiding us forward. Henry squeezed my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he whispered. I nodded, even though I was scared. "Yeah, I think we're getting close to something important." Henry's dad walked beside us, looking around with wide eyes. "I've never seen anything like this," he said quietly. "It's like we're inside a giant machine." We kept moving, our footsteps echoing softly. After a while, the tunnel opened into another room. This one was bigger than the last, with a high ceiling and walls covered in even more marks. In the middle of the room stood a strange shape, almost like a statue, but it moved ever so slightly, like it was breathing. We stopped staring at it. The statue was made of stone and metal, twisted together in a way that didn't make sense. It had arms and legs, but its face was just a smooth, blank surface. The colors in the air spun around it, bright and wild. Suddenly, the statue's head turned toward us. I gasped and took a step back. Henry grabbed my hand and I could feel him shaking. The statue didn't move any closer, but a low voice filled the room. It didn't speak with words. It was more like a feeling in my head, a message I just understood. "Why are you here?" the voice asked. I swallowed hard. "We're lost," I said out loud, even though I wasn't sure if the statue could hear me. "We just want to go home." The colors around the statue slowed down, turning soft and gentle. The voice in my head spoke again. "You followed the signs. You opened the door. You are different." I didn't know what to say. The statue seemed to be waiting for something. Henry's dad stepped forward. "Please," he said, his voice shaking, "let us go. We don't belong here." The statue was silent for a long moment. Then the colors in the room started to move, forming a path that led to another door on the far side. The voice spoke one last time. "Follow the path, but remember, some doors should stay closed." We hurried across the room, not daring to look back at the statue. As we reached the new door, I felt a strange mix of hope and fear. Maybe, just maybe, we were finally on our way out. We stepped through the new door, and the air changed right away. It was warmer now, but the tunnel was darker. The glowing marks were still there, but they were dimmer, and the colors in the air moved slower, like they were tired. Henry held my hand as we walked. His dad followed close behind, quiet and watchful. None of us spoke. Every sound seemed louder in the dark. Our shoes on the stone, a drip of water, the soft hum that was always there. After a few minutes, we came to a fork in the tunnel. One path went up, the other down. I stopped and tried to sense which way felt right. The path going up smelled fresh, like rain and pine trees. The path going down smelled sharp and cold, almost like the metal smell from before. I listened to the humming in my head. It was a little louder on the path going up. "Let's try this way," I whispered, pointing up. We started climbing. The tunnel was steep and my legs ached, but I didn't want to stop. The air got fresher with every step. I could almost taste the outside world. Suddenly, we heard a noise behind us. It was a scraping sound, slow and heavy, like something was dragging itself up the tunnel. We froze, listening. The sound stopped for a second, then started again, closer this time. Henry's dad whispered, "Keep moving, don't look back." We hurried up the tunnel, our hearts pounding. The light from the marks on the walls grew brighter, and the air felt warmer. I could see a faint glow ahead. Maybe sunlight, maybe just another strange light in this weird place. The scraping sound was right behind us now. I could feel the ground shake with every scrape. I wanted to look back, but I remembered what Henry's dad said and kept my eyes forward. We reached the top of the tunnel and burst into a small room filled with bright light. I blinked, trying to see. The colors in the air were spinning fast, almost blinding. In the middle of the room was another door, but this one looked different. It was made of wood, old and cracked, with a rusty handle. The light shone around it, and the humming in my head was so loud I could barely think. Henry looked at me, his eyes wide. "Is this it? Is this the way out?" I didn't know for sure, but I nodded. "Let's try." We all reached for the handle together, hoping this door would finally lead us home. We grabbed the old wooden handle and pulled. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a loud creak, the door slowly swung open. A rush of cool, fresh air hit my face. I took a deep breath and almost cried. It smelled like the forest, like leaves and dirt and sunlight. We stepped through the door and found ourselves outside. It was evening now. The sky was painted with pink and orange clouds. I blinked in the soft light, hardly believing we were really out. Henry's dad fell to his knees, touching the grass and laughing with relief. Henry hugged him tight, tears running down his cheeks. I looked around, trying to figure out where we were. We were in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. In the middle of the clearing was the same strange shape of dead grass I'd seen. That morning, a perfect square, only now it looked faded, like it was losing its power. The colors in the air were almost gone. Just a few swirls of blue and green floated above the ground, gentle and harmless. The humming in my head was fading too, growing quieter and quieter until it was just a memory. We stood there for a long time, just breathing and listening to the sounds of birds and wind in the trees. I felt safe again, but I couldn't forget what we'd seen underground, the strange marks, the moving statue, the voice in my head. Henry looked at me. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked quietly. I shrugged. "I don't know, but we're out, we're together. That's what matters." Henry's dad wiped his eyes and stood up. "Let's go home," he said. "We can come back tomorrow with help. Maybe someone else can figure out what's down there." As we walked out of the clearing, I glanced back one last time. The old wooden door was gone. There was only grass and trees and the fading light of evening. But deep down, I knew the forest still held secrets. And if anyone else ever found those strange marks or that hidden door, I hoped they would remember what the voice said: some doors should stay closed. We walked back through the forest, quiet and tired. The sun was almost gone and the shadows grew long between the trees. I kept looking around, half expecting to see something strange, but everything looked normal. Birds chirped, and a cool breeze brushed my face. Henry held his dad's hand the whole way. I could tell he didn't want to let go, not after everything that happened. I stayed close, making sure we didn't get separated. Every now and then, I saw a flash of color in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing there. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. We finally reached the ranger station. The lights were on and it looked warm and safe inside. Henry's dad sat down on the porch steps, breathing hard. He looked older than before, but his eyes were full of relief. Henry called for help on the radio. Soon, more rangers arrived. They wrapped blankets around us and gave us water. Everyone wanted to know what happened, but I just said we got lost in the caves and found our way out. I didn't talk about the strange marks or the moving statue. I didn't mention the voice in my head or the colors in the air. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. After the others left, Henry sat beside me on the porch. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked again, his voice small. I thought about the door, the warning, and the way the tunnels kept changing. I thought about the statue's words. Some doors should stay closed. "I don't know," I said softly, "but I think we'll be okay as long as we remember what we saw, and as long as we stick together." Henry nodded and leaned against me. The night was quiet, and for the first time I felt safe, but I knew I would never forget the colors, the humming, and the secrets hidden deep under the forest. As the stars came out, I promised myself I'd be careful. Some mysteries are better left alone, but if anyone ever needed help in those woods again, I'd be ready. My name is Marcus Tanner. I'm a park ranger here in the Okefenokee Swamp, Georgia. Most folks just call it the refuge, but to me, it's always felt more like a living thing than a place. The swamp wakes up before the sun, with fog curling over the dark water and the cypress trees standing like old guards. Sometimes when the mist is thick, it feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I start my mornings early, before the heat and the bugs really get going. My job is to patrol the waterways, make sure the tourists don't get lost and keep an eye out for anything unusual. But honestly, I don't need a map to find my way. Even though I've only been here a few months, it's like the swamp is already part of me. Maybe it's because of my Cherokee and African roots, or maybe it's just something I can't explain. This morning, I took the airboat out alone. The engine's hum was the only sound, except for the birds waking up and the frogs singing their strange songs. I steered through a narrow channel, the water so still it looked like glass. Every now and then, I get a whiff of something sharp and chemical mixed with the usual smell of wet earth and old leaves. As I moved deeper into the swamp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been here before. Not just in this life, but in another time. Sometimes, the shadows between the trees remind me of the tunnels I crawled through back in Vietnam. Dark, tight spaces where you had to trust your senses more than your eyes. I learned to listen to the quiet, to feel when something wasn't right. That's probably why I noticed the pool before anyone else. The water there was a strange red color, like someone had spilled paint into it. Dead fish floated on the surface, all lined up in a perfect circle. I stopped the boat and just stared. The hair on my arms stood up. I didn't know why, but I felt like the swamp was trying to tell me something. Later, when I got back to the research station, my son Kevin was waiting for me. He visits every summer, and I try to keep him close. This place isn't always safe, and I worry about him more than I let on. But seeing him there, grinning and eager to explore, made me forget my worries for a moment. Still, that red pool stayed in my mind. I had a feeling it was just the beginning of something much bigger and much stranger than anyone here was ready for. That afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about the red pool. I kept replaying what I'd seen, the dead fish, the strange color, the way the water didn't move like it should. I wanted to believe it was just pollution, maybe some chemicals from upstream. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Kevin wanted to go fishing, so we took a small rowboat out to one of the quieter spots. He was talking about school and his friends back in Atlanta, but I could barely listen. My eyes kept drifting to the water, looking for anything out of place. Every time a stick floated by, my heart jumped. After a while, Kevin got quiet too. He looked at me and asked, "Dad, are you okay?" I tried to smile and told him I was just tired. But he's a smart kid. He knows when I'm worried. Suddenly, we heard a splash behind us. We both turned fast. At first I thought it was just a gator, but then I saw bubbles rising in a perfect line, heading right for our boat. The water around the bubbles was darker, almost black. I grabbed the oar and pushed us away as fast as I could. My hands were shaking, but I tried not to let Kevin see. We made it back to shore, but I could tell Kevin was scared. He kept glancing at the water, like he expected something to crawl out after us. I tried to calm him down, telling him it was probably just a big turtle or a log moving under the surface. But I didn't believe it myself. That night, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the swamp. Frogs croaked, bugs buzzed, and every so often I thought I heard something else, a soft, wet slapping, like something dragging itself through the mud. I got up and looked out the window. The moon was bright, shining off the water, but I couldn't see anything moving. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there. Something was changing in the swamp, and whatever it was getting closer. The next morning, I went back to the red pool. I had to know if it was still there or if I'd just imagined it. Kevin wanted to come, but I told him to stay at the station with the other rangers. I didn't want him anywhere near that place. I walked slowly, listening to the sounds around me. The swamp was quieter than usual. Even the birds seemed to be hiding. When I reached the pool, I saw that the water was even redder than before. The circle of dead fish was gone, but now there were strange marks in the mud, like something had crawled out of the water and dragged itself away. I knelt down to look closer. The marks weren't from any animal I knew. They looked almost like handprints, but with too many fingers, and the fingers were long and thin. My heart thudded in my chest. I took a few pictures with my phone, just in case someone thought I was making it up. Suddenly, I heard a branch snap behind me. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a shape moving between the trees. It was quick, low to the ground, and gone before I could get a good look. I stood there for a long time, listening. The swamp felt different, like it was holding its breath. I decided it was time to go back. As I walked away, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those strange handprints following me. When I got back to the station, I showed the pictures to my friend Sam. He's been a ranger here longer than anyone. He looked at the marks and frowned. "That's not gator," he said quietly. "And it's not bear either." We both sat there, not saying much. I could tell Sam was worried too. He told me to keep an eye on Kevin and not to go out alone anymore. That night I locked all the doors and windows. I kept my flashlight and my old army knife by the bed. I didn't know what was out there, but I knew it was real, and I knew it was just getting started. The next few days, things got even stranger. People started getting sick. It began with a couple of campers who came into the station complaining about headaches and rashes. Then some of the rangers started feeling weak and dizzy. Even Sam called in sick, which he never did. I tried to keep Kevin inside, but he was restless. He kept asking questions about the red pool and the marks I'd found. I didn't want to scare him, so I just told him to stay close and not wander off. I could tell he was worried, even if he tried to act brave. One afternoon, a scientist from the city showed up. Her name was Dr. Patel. She wore a mask and gloves and carried a big metal case. She said she'd heard about the sick campers and wanted to test the water. I took her to the pool, and we both stood there staring at the red water. Dr. Patel took some samples and looked at the marks in the mud. She didn't say much, but I could see the concern on her face. "This isn't normal," she finally said. "Something's living in that water, and it's making people sick." On the way back, she told me about a parasite she'd studied in another swamp. It started out small, but it could change and grow inside a person. Sometimes people didn't even know they were infected until it was too late. Her words made my skin crawl. That night, I checked on Kevin every hour. He was sleeping, but I kept thinking about the parasite. Was it already here? Was it spreading? I felt helpless, like the swamp was closing in around us. The next morning, Dr. Patel called me over. She looked tired and worried. "Marcus, whatever's in that water, it's not just a parasite, it's something new, something we've never seen before." Her voice was shaky. "We need to warn everyone, and we need to do it fast." I nodded, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. The swamp wasn't just dangerous anymore, it was turning into something else. And I didn't know if anyone could stop it. We started warning people right away. Dr. Patel put up signs telling everyone to stay out of the water. The park closed some of the trails, and the rangers went around to all the campsites telling folks to pack up and leave. Some listened, but others just laughed and said we were overreacting. Kevin stayed close to me all the time now. He didn't even ask to go fishing. He just watched me with wide eyes, like he was waiting for me to make everything better. I tried to act calm, but inside I felt scared. I'd never seen the swamp this quiet. Even the animals were hiding. That evening, a black SUV pulled up to the station. 2 men in suits got out. They said they were from the government, but they didn't show any badges. They asked Dr. Patel a lot of questions and took her samples away. When I tried to ask what was going on, they just told me to mind my own business. After they left, Dr. Patel looked upset. She whispered to me that she didn't trust them. "They're not here to help us," she said. "They want to cover this up." I believed her. I'd seen enough in my life to know when someone was hiding the truth. I decided to keep my own notes and pictures just in case. That night, I heard something strange outside. It sounded like someone walking, but the steps were slow and heavy. I peeked out the window and saw a figure near the edge of the swamp. It was too dark to see clearly, but the shape looked wrong, like it was hunched over and dragging one arm. I stayed up the rest of the night listening. Every so often, I heard that same heavy, dragging sound moving through the trees. The swamp felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. I knew then that whatever was in the water wasn't just making people sick, it was changing them, and it was only a matter of time before it reached us too. The next morning I found Kevin sitting on the porch, staring out at the swamp. He looked pale and tired, like he hadn't slept at all. I sat down next to him and put my arm around his shoulders. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "Dad, I had a dream last night. I saw something in the water. It was calling my name, but it didn't sound human." His voice shook a little. "I think it wants me to come out there." I tried to comfort him, telling him it was just a bad dream, but deep down, I was worried. Kevin had always been sensitive. He could feel things that other people missed. I wondered if the swamp was trying to reach him somehow. Later that day, Dr. Patel came back with news. She'd managed to test a small sample before the government men took the rest. She said the parasite was changing fast, adapting to whatever it touched. "It's like it's learning," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "And it's stronger than anything I've seen before." We decided to check the red pool one more time. I didn't want to bring Kevin, but he begged to come, promising to stay close. When we got there, the water was bubbling, and the air smelled sharp and sour. The marks in the mud were everywhere now, crisscrossing the shore. Suddenly, Kevin gasped and pointed. Something was moving just under the surface, long, thin shapes twisting and wriggling. I grabbed his hand and pulled him back, my heart pounding. Dr. Patel snapped pictures, her hands shaking. We hurried back to the station and locked the doors. Dr. Patel started calling other scientists, but most didn't believe her. Some even laughed, saying she was just scared of swamp water. That night, Kevin had another nightmare. He woke up screaming, saying the thing in the water was getting closer. I held him tight and promised I'd keep him safe, but I wasn't sure if I could. The swamp felt more alive than ever, and I knew we were running out of time. The next day, the swamp was covered in a thick fog that didn't lift, even when the sun was high. It felt like the whole world had shrunk to just our little station and the water all around us. I kept Kevin inside, but he kept looking out the window, nervous. Dr. Patel was working on her laptop, trying to send her findings to anyone who would listen. I could tell she was scared, but she was also determined. If we can figure out how this thing spreads, maybe we can stop it, she said, mostly to herself. Around noon, we heard shouting from the far side of the station. One of the rangers, Mike, came stumbling out of the trees. He looked terrible. His skin was pale and his eyes were wild. He kept scratching at his arms like something was crawling under his skin. I ran to help him, but he pushed me away. "Stay! Back!" he yelled. "It's in me. I can feel it." He dropped to his knees, shaking all over. Dr. Patel tried to calm him, but he just kept mumbling about the red water and the voices in his head. We got him inside and tried to make him comfortable, but there wasn't much we could do. Dr. Patel took his temperature and checked his eyes. She whispered to me, "He's infected. It's moving fast now." Kevin watched from the hallway, his face pale. I could see he was scared, but he didn't cry. He just stood there, holding onto the wall like he was afraid the floor might disappear. That night, the fog pressed against the windows so thick we couldn't see the trees. Mike kept muttering in his sleep, sometimes shouting, sometimes crying. Dr. Patel stayed by his side, taking notes and trying to help, but I could tell she was losing hope. I sat in the dark with Kevin, listening to the sounds outside. Every so often, I thought I heard something moving in the fog, soft footsteps, or maybe the dragging sound again. I held Kevin close and promised him we'd get through this, but deep down, I was starting to wonder if that was true. The next morning, Mike was gone. We found his bed empty and the back door wide open, swinging in the breeze. There were muddy footprints leading out into the fog, and they didn't look quite right. The toes were too long, and the steps were uneven, like he was dragging his foot. Kevin clung to my side, scared. Dr. Patel looked like she hadn't slept at all. "We need to find him," she said, her voice shaking. "He could be dangerous, or he could need help." We grabbed our flashlights and headed out, following the strange footprints. The fog made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Every sound seemed louder. The snap of a twig, the splash of water, even our own breathing. We found more of those weird handprints in the mud, just like the ones I'd seen by the red pool. They were everywhere now, pressed into the soft earth, climbing up tree trunks and disappearing into the shadows. Suddenly we heard a cry. It was Mike, but his voice sounded rough and strange, like he was trying to talk with a mouthful of water. We followed the sound until we saw him, hunched over by the edge of the swamp. His skin was even paler and his eyes looked glassy and far away. Dr. Patel tried to talk to him, but he just stared at her, not really seeing. Then, without warning, he slipped into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. Kevin gasped and grabbed my hand. We waited, but Mike didn't come back up. The water was still, except for a few bubbles and a ripple that moved out toward the middle of the swamp. We stood there, hearts pounding, afraid to move. After a long time, we headed back to the station. No one said a word. The fog was starting to lift, but the air felt heavy and strange. I knew then that the thing in the water was getting stronger. And now it had one of us. After we lost Mike, everything changed. The other rangers wanted to leave, but the government men came back and told us we had to stay put. They said it was for our own safety, but I could tell they were more interested in keeping the story quiet than helping us. Dr. Patel was angry. "They don't care about us," she whispered to me. "They just want to study this thing." She kept working on her laptop, sending messages and notes to anyone who might listen. I tried to help, but mostly I just stayed close to Kevin. Kevin was quieter than ever. He hardly ate, and he jumped at every sound. I could see how scared he was, and it broke my heart. I tried to be brave for him, but I was scared too. One night, as we sat together in the dark, we heard a tapping on the window. It was slow and steady, like someone was knocking with long fingers. I shined my flashlight outside, but the beam just bounced off the glass and lit up the fog. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something watching us. Dr. Patel came into the room, looking pale. "It's not just in the water anymore," she said quietly. "It's in the air, in the mud, maybe even in the rain. We have to find a way to stop it, or at least slow it down." We spent the next day sealing up the windows and doors, trying to keep the outside out. But the swamp felt like it was pressing in on us, closer every hour. The sounds at night got worse. Scratching, tapping, sometimes even a low, wet whisper that made my skin crawl. I held Kevin close and told him stories about when he was little, hoping it would help him sleep. But I knew he could hear the fear in my voice. We were trapped, and the thing in the swamp was waiting for us to make a mistake. Every day, it felt like we had less time. And every night, the swamp seemed a little more alive, a little more hungry. A few days later, something happened that none of us could explain. Kevin woke up early, shaking and sweating. He said he'd heard a voice in his dream again, only this time it sounded like me. It kept calling his name, asking him to come outside. I hugged him tight and promised I would never call him like that. But I could see in his eyes that he was truly scared. Dr. Patel listened carefully and wrote everything down in her notebook. She said, "It's like the parasite is trying to trick us, using our memories and voices." That morning, the government men started acting strange too. One of them, a tall man with a scar on his chin, began scratching at his neck and muttering to himself. He wouldn't look anyone in the eye. The other man tried to keep him calm, but I could see fear in both their faces. Dr. Patel pulled me aside. "It's spreading faster than we thought. If it can get into their heads, it can get into anyone's." Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Later that day, we heard a crash from the back of the building. The man with the scar had smashed a window and run out into the swamp. We watched from the porch as he stumbled through the mud, shouting and laughing like he'd lost his mind. Then he disappeared into the trees, and the swamp swallowed him up. The rest of us stayed inside, too scared to follow. The air felt heavy and thick, like we were breathing through wet cloth. Even the light coming through the windows looked strange, almost red. That night, nobody slept. We sat together in the main room, listening to the sounds outside. Every so often we heard footsteps in the mud or something brushing against the walls. Kevin held my hand so tight it hurt, but I didn't let go. The swamp was changing, and so were the people who went into it. I didn't know how much longer we could last, but I knew we had to try, for Kevin, for Dr. Patel, and for anyone else who might still be safe. The next morning, we woke to silence. No birds, no frogs, not even the buzzing of bugs. It was like the swamp itself was holding its breath. Kevin stayed close to me, and Dr. Patel barely looked up from her notes. The air inside the station felt thick and heavy, almost hard to breathe. Suddenly, we heard a knock at the front door. Not a tap, but a slow, steady knock, like someone was taking their time. I told Kevin to stay back and opened the door just a crack. Outside stood Sam, the old ranger. But something was wrong. His eyes looked empty, and his skin was grey and damp, like he'd been out in the swamp all night. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile I remembered. "Let me in, Marcus," he said in a voice that sounded almost normal, but not quite. "It's safe now. You can come out." I slammed the door shut and locked it. Kevin started to cry, and Dr. Patel grabbed my arm. "That's not Sam anymore," she whispered. "It's using him." We heard Sam's voice calling to us from outside, begging us to come out, promising that everything would be okay. But the words sounded wrong, like he was reading from a script. After a while, the voice faded, and we heard footsteps squishing. Away through the mud, we all sat together in the main room, too scared to move. Dr. Patel said, "The parasite is learning. It's not just taking over bodies. It's using their memories, their voices. It wants us to trust it." Kevin looked up at me, his eyes wide. "What if it gets inside here?" he asked. I squeezed his hand. "We won't let it," I said, even though I wasn't sure. The swamp was pressing in on us, and every hour it felt like it was getting harder to fight. That night, I stayed awake, listening for Sam's voice and watching the shadows move across the walls. I knew we couldn't stay locked up forever. Sooner or later, we'd have to face whatever was waiting out there. The next day, Dr. Patel came up with a plan. She said we needed to find out where the parasite was coming from. Maybe if we could find the source, we could stop it, or at least slow it down. I didn't like the idea of going back out there, but I knew she was right. We couldn't hide forever. I told Kevin to stay inside and keep the doors locked, no matter what. He hugged me tight and begged me not to go, but I promised I'd be careful and come back soon. Dr. Patel and I packed up some supplies, flashlights, masks, gloves, and her notebook. We stepped outside, and the swamp felt even stranger than before. The air was thick and smelled sour, and the ground squished under our boots. We followed the old trail toward the red pool. Every step felt heavy, and the trees seemed to lean in, closer, like they were watching us. We didn't talk much, just listened for any sounds. Footsteps, voices, anything that didn't belong. When we reached the red pool, it looked worse than ever. The water was bubbling, and the red color had spread out into the grass and mud. Strange shapes moved just under the surface, twisting and wriggling like worms. Dr. Patel took out her phone and started recording everything. Suddenly, we heard a splash behind us. We turned and saw something crawling out of the water. It looked like a person, but its arms and legs were too long, and its skin was gray and shiny. It moved slowly, dragging itself toward us. Dr. Patel grabbed my arm. "We have to go now," she whispered. We ran back through the trees, not stopping until we could see the station. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. When we got inside, I hugged Kevin and promised him I was okay. Dr. Patel looked shaken, but she started writing down everything we'd seen. "It's getting stronger," she said quietly, "and it's not going to stop. Not unless we find a way to fight back." That night, I kept thinking about the thing in the water and how close it had come. I knew we were running out of time. That night, the storm rolled in. Thunder shook the windows, and rain poured down so hard it sounded like the whole swamp was roaring. I sat by the window, watching the flashes of lightning light up the twisted trees and black water outside. Kevin was curled up next to me, holding my hand tight. Dr. Patel was at the table, writing notes and checking her samples by flashlight. Suddenly, the power went out. The room went dark except for the flashes from the storm. For a moment, it was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Then in the darkness, we heard a new sound, a low, gurgling moan coming from outside, mixed with the rain. Dr. Patel grabbed her flashlight and shined it at the door. The beam caught a shape moving just outside the window. It was tall and thin, with long arms pressed against the glass. Its face was pale and stretched, and its eyes glowed when the lightning flashed. Kevin squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "Don't let it in, Dad," he whispered. "I won't," I promised, even though I was scared too. The thing outside started tapping on the glass, slow and steady, just like Sam had done. It whispered our names, first mine, then Kevin's, then Dr. Patel's. The voice sounded wrong, like it was echoing from underwater. We backed away from the window and huddled together in the middle of the room. The tapping kept going, and the storm raged louder. I could feel the fear in the air, thick as the fog that used to cover the swamp. After what felt like forever, the tapping stopped. The storm moved on, and the thing outside was gone. But none of us slept that night. We just sat together, waiting for the sun to come up, hoping that somehow we'd find a way to survive one more day. When the sun finally rose, the swamp looked different. The water was higher from all the rain, and the trees seemed to lean in, even closer than before. Everything was quiet, too quiet. I checked every window and door to make sure nothing had gotten in during the night. Dr. Patel called us over. She had been looking at her samples by flashlight all night. "I think I found something," she said. "The parasite doesn't like salt. When I added a little salt to the water, the things inside started to die." My mind raced. We didn't have much salt, just what was left in the kitchen, but maybe it would be enough to protect us for a little while. Dr. Patel said we could try sprinkling salt around the doors and windows, just to see if it helped. Kevin and I worked together, pouring lines of salt everywhere we could. It felt silly, like something out of an old story, but we were willing to try anything. As we worked, I noticed Kevin seemed a little braver, like having a job to do gave him hope. The day passed slowly. We stayed inside, listening for any strange sounds. Every once in a while, I thought I saw something moving between the trees, but it never came close. Dr. Patel kept working on her notes, trying to figure out how we could stop the parasite for good. That night, we all slept in the same room, just in case. The salt lines stayed unbroken, and nothing tapped on the windows. For the first time in days, I felt like we had a chance. But deep down, I knew the swamp wasn't done with us yet. The calm felt uneasy, like the quiet before another storm. I held Kevin close and whispered that I loved him, promising we'd get through this together. I just hoped I could keep that promise. The next morning, the air felt heavy and thick, almost sticky. The salt lines were still there, but outside the swamp looked even darker than before. I could see shapes moving far away between the trees. Too far to make out, but enough to keep my heart pounding. Dr. Patel was hopeful about the salt, but she knew it was only a small fix. "We need to find a way to stop this at the source," she said. "If we don't, it will just keep spreading." We talked about what to do next. Dr. Patel thought if we could dump a big bag of salt into the red pool, it might kill the parasite, or at least slow it down. The problem was, we didn't have enough salt and the nearest store was hours away. But then Kevin spoke up, his voice small but steady. "There's a big bag of salt in the maintenance shed," he said. "I saw it last week when I was helping Sam." I looked at Dr. Patel, and for the first time in days, I saw a little hope in her eyes. We decided we had to try. I told Kevin to stay inside and keep the doors locked, but he shook his head. "I want to help," he said. "I didn't want to put him in danger, but I knew he was brave, and I couldn't do it alone." We moved quickly, sticking together as we hurried across the muddy yard to the shed. The swamp was quiet, but I felt eyes on us the whole way. Inside the shed, we found the bag of salt, heavy, but we could carry it together. We made our way toward the red pool, hearts pounding. Every step felt like it took forever. When we got there, the water was bubbling, and the red color was even brighter. I ripped open the bag and started pouring salt into the water. Dr. Patel helped, and Kevin stood close, watching the water carefully. At first, nothing happened. Then slowly, the bubbling slowed down. The red color faded a little, and the strange shapes under the water stopped moving. For a moment, the swamp was quiet again. We hurried back to the station, not looking back. That night, we all slept a little easier, hoping we had finally done something right. But I knew the fight wasn't over yet. The swamp still felt alive, and I could tell it was waiting for its next move. The next day, the swamp was strangely quiet. Even the usual sounds, birds, frogs, buzzing bugs, were gone. The water near the red pool looked clearer, and the bubbling had stopped. For the first time in a long while, I felt a little hope. Maybe the salt had worked. Dr. Patel checked her samples. She smiled just a little. It's weaker now. The parasite isn't moving like before. Kevin grinned, proud that he had helped save us. I ruffled his hair and told him he was the bravest kid I knew, but I still felt uneasy. The swamp wasn't normal yet. The air was thick, and the trees seemed to lean in, as if they were listening. I kept checking the windows, half expecting to see someone or something watching us. That afternoon, we heard a noise at the edge of the clearing. It sounded like footsteps, slow and heavy. I peeked outside and saw a shape moving between the trees. It looked like Sam, the old ranger, but his skin was gray and his eyes were empty. He didn't come any closer, just stood there staring at the station. Dr. Patel whispered, "He's still out there. Maybe the parasite is weak, but it's not gone." We stayed inside, holding our breath, waiting for Sam to leave. After a while, he turned and disappeared into the trees. I felt sad and scared at the same time. Sam had been my friend, and now he was just a shadow. That night, Kevin asked me if things would ever go back to normal. I hugged him close and told him I hoped so. Dr. Patel said we should keep watching the swamp and keep the salt lines strong, just in case. As I lay in bed, I listened to the quiet outside. The swamp had changed us, and I knew we'd never forget what happened. But we were still here, still together, and for now, that was enough. The next few days passed slowly. The swamp stayed quiet, but we didn't let our guard down. Every morning, Kevin and I checked the salt lines around the doors and windows. Dr. Patel kept testing her samples, making sure the parasite was still weak. We ate simple meals together and tried to act normal, but the fear was always there, just under the surface. One afternoon, a heavy rain started to fall. I worried the salt lines would wash away, so Kevin and I hurried outside to pour more salt. Around the station, the rain soaked us to the bone, but we didn't stop until every line was thick and clear. As we finished, I heard a strange sound coming from the swamp. A low, rumbling growl, almost like the earth itself was angry. The trees swayed, and the water near the red pool started to ripple again. Dr. Patel ran out to join us, her face pale. "It's fighting back," she said. "The parasite is trying to survive." Suddenly, we saw shapes moving in the water, long, thin arms reaching up, twisting and grabbing at the air. Kevin grabbed my hand, and I pulled him close. We backed away from the pool, our hearts pounding. Dr. Patel shouted, "Get inside!" We ran for the station, slamming the door behind us. The shapes in the water thrashed and splashed, but they didn't cross the salt lines. We watched from the window as the storm raged and the swamp seemed to scream. After a while, the shapes sank back under the water. The rain slowed, and the swamp grew quiet again. We all sat together in the main room, soaked and shaking. Kevin looked up at me. "Is it over?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. The swamp was quieter, but I could still feel it watching us. I hugged Kevin and told him we'd done everything we could. Dr. Patel nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. That night, we stayed close, listening to the rain and hoping the worst was finally behind us. But deep down, I knew the swamp would never be the same. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds, shining bright and warm over the swamp. For the first time in what felt like forever, I heard birds singing and frogs croaking again. The air smelled fresh, not sour or heavy. It was like the whole swamp was taking a deep breath. We checked the red pool together. The water was clear, and the strange red color was gone. No more bubbling, no more shapes moving underneath. Dr. Patel tested the water and smiled. "It's clean," she said. "The parasite is gone." Kevin grinned and hugged me tight. I felt so proud of him and so relieved. We walked back to the station, feeling lighter with every step. Dr. Patel started packing up her things. She said she would send her notes and samples to other scientists so they could learn from what happened here. The government men never came back. Maybe they were too scared, or maybe they just wanted to forget. We cleaned up the station and took down the warning signs. The other rangers started to return, and life slowly went back to normal, but nothing would ever be quite the same. We had seen what the swamp could do, how it could change, and how it could fight back. Sometimes when the fog rolls in and the water gets very still, I remember those nights. I remember the fear, the voices and the things moving in the dark. But I also remember how brave Kevin was and how we stuck together no matter what. Now every time I walk through the swamp, I carry a little salt in my pocket, just in case. And I never forget to listen to the quiet, to watch for things that don't belong. The swamp gave us back our lives, but it also gave us a warning. We survived, we learned, and we'll never forget. My name is Drew Mitchell. I'm a park ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains, but I wasn't always one. I used to be a police detective in the city. Things were different back then, louder, busier, and honestly a lot scarier in some ways. But after something happened one night, something I still can't explain, I left it all behind and came here, hoping the quiet would help me forget. It hasn't. This morning, like most mornings, I started my patrol before the sun had burned away the thick fog that hangs over the forest. The mist here is different. It's not just water in the air. It feels alive, like it's watching me. Sometimes when I'm walking alone, I think I see shapes moving just out of sight. Faces maybe, but not like any face I've ever seen. Just smooth, pale ovals drifting in the fog. I tell myself, it's just my mind playing tricks, but I'm not sure I believe that anymore. I try to stay busy. I check the trails, make sure the signs are still standing, and look for anything out of place. This morning, I found something strange. One of the trail cameras I set up last week had snapped a picture in the middle of the night. When I looked at the photo, my heart skipped a beat. There, in the middle of the path, was a figure made of mist. It didn't have any features, no eyes, no mouth, just a shape, almost human, but not quite. It looked a lot like what I saw that night in the city, the night that changed everything. I know most people would say it's just fog and shadows. Maybe they're right, but I can't shake the feeling that there's something here, something hiding in the mist, watching and waiting. I've started writing everything down, taking notes, saving every strange photo. I want to understand what's going on, even if it scares me. As I walked deeper into the forest, I noticed patches of strange mushrooms growing in perfect circles. Some of them glowed faintly, like tiny stars on the forest floor. When I looked away and then back again, the shapes seemed to shift, forming patterns I couldn't quite follow. It made me feel dizzy, like the ground was moving under my feet. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind. But then I remember that night in the city, the face in the fog, and I know I have to keep searching for answers. Even if no one else believes me, I have to find out what's really hiding in the mist. The next day, I woke up early. The fog was even thicker than before, curling around my cabin like a blanket. I made myself a cup of coffee and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. In my stomach, my radio crackled, but there were no messages. It was just me and the quiet. After breakfast, I grabbed my notebook and camera and headed out. I wanted to check on the mushroom circles I'd seen yesterday. Maybe there was a simple reason for them. Maybe animals had made them. Or maybe it was just a weird way the mushrooms grew here. But deep down, I felt there was more to it. As I walked, I heard a soft humming sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the trees, but then I realized it was coming from the ground. I knelt down next to one of the glowing mushroom circles and listened. The sound was gentle, almost like a song, but not a song I'd ever heard before. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I took a few pictures and wrote down everything I noticed. The mushrooms were cool and sticky to the touch, and when I pressed my finger against one, it left a faint blue mark on my skin. I wiped it off, but it didn't go away right away. That made me nervous, but I tried not to show it. As I stood up, I spotted someone through the trees. At first, I thought it was just another hiker, but as they got closer, I realized it was Maddie, the artist who lived in the little house at the edge of the park. She was carrying a sketchbook and looked just as surprised to see me as I was to see her. "Morning, Drew," she said, her voice quiet. "Did you hear that music too?" I nodded. "Yeah, I thought I was imagining it." She smiled, but it was a nervous smile. "I've been drawing these mushrooms for weeks. They're everywhere now. And sometimes, when I'm painting, I feel like something is watching me." We stood there in the fog, listening to the strange humming. Neither of us spoke for a while. The forest felt different, like it was holding its breath. Finally, Maddie said, "Maybe we should try to figure this out together." I agreed. I didn't want to face whatever was out there alone. We decided to meet the next morning and start searching for answers. As I walked back to my cabin, I couldn't help but wonder what we would find, and if we really wanted to know. Chatted. Next morning, Maddie met me by the old wooden bridge just as the sun was starting to rise. The fog was still thick, swirling around our feet as we walked. Maddie carried her sketchbook, and I had my camera and notebook. We didn't talk much. There was a heavy feeling in the air, like the forest was waiting for us to make the first move. We started by following the trail where I'd found the glowing mushrooms. The humming sound was back, a little louder this time. It seemed to come and go, almost like it was moving with us. Maddie stopped every so often to draw what she saw. She was good at noticing small details, patterns in the way the mushrooms grew, strange marks on the trees. Even the way the fog seemed to twist into shapes if you stared long enough. After a while, we found a new circle of mushrooms, bigger than the others. In the middle of the circle, the ground was bare, like something had been sitting there. Maddie knelt down and touched the soil. "It's warm," she whispered, looking up at me with wide eyes. I took a few pictures and wrote down everything we saw. The humming was stronger here, and it made my chest feel tight. I tried to ignore it, but it was like the sound was inside my head, not just around me. Suddenly, Maddie pointed to the edge of the circle. "Look," she said. There were footprints, small, bare, and leading away into the trees. They didn't look like animal tracks. They looked human, but something was off. The toes were too long, and the prints seemed to glow faintly, just like the mushrooms. We followed the tracks, moving slowly and quietly. Every step felt heavy, like the forest was pushing back against us. The fog got thicker, and the humming turned into a low, almost sad song. I could feel my heart beating faster. We stopped when the tracks disappeared at the base of a huge old tree. The bark was covered in strange blue marks, the same color as the stain the mushroom had left on my finger. Maddie reached out and touched the tree, then quickly pulled her hand back. "It feels alive," she whispered. We looked at each other, both of us scared but also curious. Whatever was happening in these woods, it was bigger than just a few weird mushrooms, and now we were right in the middle of it. We stood there for a long moment, staring at the old tree. The blue marks on the bark seemed to move if you looked at them out of the corner of your eye. Maddie hugged her sketchbook to her chest, and I could see her hands shaking a little. I tried to act brave, but my heart was pounding. "Should we go back?" Maddie asked quietly. I thought about it. Every part of me wanted to run back to my cabin, lock the door, and forget about all of this. But I also knew that if we left now, I'd never stop thinking about the footprints, the music, and the strange feeling that something was watching us. "Let's just look around a little more," I said, trying to sound calm. We walked slowly around the tree. On the other side, we found something that made us both stop in our tracks. There was a small wooden box, half buried in the moss. It looked old, with carvings on the lid that matched the blue marks on the tree. Maddie knelt down and brushed the dirt away. "Should we open it?" she whispered. I nodded, even though my hands felt cold and sweaty. Maddie lifted the lid. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper and a small round stone that glowed softly in the dim light. The paper was covered in neat handwriting. It was a letter. I read it out loud. The letter talked about the keepers of the mist and warned anyone who found the box to be careful. It said the mushrooms and the fog were connected and that something ancient was waking up in the woods. The letter ended with a warning: "Do not follow the music." Maddie and I looked at each other. The humming sound was still there, even louder now, like it was trying to pull us deeper into the forest. I put the letter and the stone back in the box and closed the lid. "We need to be careful," I said softly. "Whatever is out here, it doesn't want to be found." We decided to head back, but as we walked away from the tree, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The fog seemed to close in behind us, and the music followed us all the way back to the trail. Maddie and I didn't talk. Much as we walked back to the main trail, the humming sound was still there, but now it felt like it was following us. Every time I looked over my shoulder, the fog seemed thicker, almost like it was closing in behind us. My hands felt cold and sweaty, and I tried to keep my breathing quiet so I could listen for anything strange. We passed by another circle of mushrooms. This one was bigger than the others, and the glow was brighter, almost blue. Maddie stopped and stared at it. Her eyes were wide, and I could tell she was scared, even if she didn't say anything. I felt the same way. I wanted to keep walking, but my feet felt heavy, like the ground was holding onto my boots. All at once, we heard a twig snap nearby. We both froze. My heart was pounding so loud I thought Maddie could hear it. I looked around, trying to see through the fog, but everything was just white and grey. The forest was so quiet that even our breathing sounded loud. I whispered, "Did you hear that?" Maddie nodded, her eyes not leaving the shadows between the trees. We waited, not moving, for what felt like a long time. The humming got louder, and I could feel it in my chest. It was almost like the music was trying to tell us something, but I didn't know what. My skin prickled, and I felt like someone or something was watching us from the mist. Finally, the sound faded a little, and we started walking again, faster this time. I kept glancing back just in case. The fog seemed to move with us, swirling around our legs and making it hard to see the path. Every little sound made me jump. A bird flapping its wings, a branch creaking in the wind. I tried to tell myself it was all normal, but it didn't feel normal at all. When we finally reached the edge of the woods, we both let out a breath. The fog was thinner here, and I could see the outline of my cabin through the trees. Maddie looked at me and said, "We need to figure out what's going on before it gets worse." I nodded. I knew she was right, but deep down, I was scared of what we might find if we kept looking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the humming in my head. It was like the music from the mushrooms was stuck in my mind, playing over and over. I got up and looked out the window. The fog was back, thicker than ever, curling around the trees and my cabin like long white fingers. I thought about the letter we found in the box. Do not follow the music. But what if the music was already following us? I wondered if Maddie was awake too, thinking about the same thing. I almost called her, but it was late, and I didn't want to scare her more. In the morning, I found blue marks on my porch. They looked just like the ones on the tree and the box. My stomach twisted. I hadn't seen them there before. I touched one, and it felt cold and sticky, just like the mushrooms. I wiped my hand on my jeans, but the blue color stayed on my skin. Maddie showed up a few minutes later holding her sketchbook. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I kept hearing that song." I nodded. "Me too, and look." I showed her the blue marks on the porch. She touched one carefully and frowned. "It's spreading," she whispered. We decided to look around the cabin for more clues. We found tiny mushrooms growing in the cracks of the porch and along the steps. They glowed faintly even in the daylight. I felt a chill run down my back. Maddie flipped through her sketchbook and showed me a drawing she'd made last night. It was the old tree, but in her picture, the tree had a face, a sad, pale face, hidden in the bark. She looked at me, her voice shaking. "I don't remember drawing this." We both stared at the picture, feeling more scared than before. The fog was getting thicker, the blue marks were spreading, and the music was always there, just under the surface. It felt like the forest was trying to tell us something, and we didn't know how to listen. Maddie and I sat on the porch, staring at her drawing of the tree with the sad face. The morning felt cold, even though the sun was up. The fog didn't seem to care about the sunlight. It just hovered around us, thick and silent. We talked about what to do next. I wanted to call someone for help, maybe the park manager or even the police. But what would I say? That mushrooms were glowing and singing and the fog was leaving blue marks on my house? No one would believe us. Maddie agreed. She said, "If we want answers, we have to find them ourselves." We packed a backpack with water, snacks, and a flashlight just in case. Then we headed back into the woods, following the trail toward the old tree. The fog was even thicker today. It was hard to see more than a few steps ahead. The music was there too, soft but always in the background, like a song you can't get out of your head. As we walked, we noticed more blue marks on the trees and rocks. The mushroom circles were everywhere now, some of them so big they crossed the trail. We had to step over them carefully. I tried not to touch them, but sometimes my boot brushed against the glowing caps, and I felt a cold tingle in my foot. After a while, we reached the old tree again. The blue marks were brighter, almost shining in the dim light. Maddie took out her sketchbook and started to draw, her hands moving quickly. I walked around the tree looking for anything new. That's when I saw something strange. In the roots of the tree, there was a small hole, just big enough for a hand to fit through. Inside, I could see something shiny, a piece of metal maybe. I called Maddie over, and together we dug around the roots until we pulled out a small, rusty key. We looked at each other, both of us breathing hard. "What do you think it opens?" Maddie asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, but I think we're supposed to find out." The fog swirled around us, and the music grew louder. It felt like the forest was waiting for us to make our next move. We stood by the old tree, holding the rusty key. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The music in the air seemed to press closer, like it was urging us to hurry up. I looked at Maddie, and she looked back at me. We both knew we had to keep going, even if we were scared. We searched around the tree, looking for something the key might open. Maddie checked the roots while I walked around the trunk, brushing away moss and leaves. Finally, I spotted a small wooden door, almost hidden behind a thick curtain of vines. It was only about the size of a lunchbox, and it had a tiny keyhole right in the middle. My hands were shaking as I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it, and with a soft click, the door swung open. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. The pages were yellow and smelled old, like earth and rain. Maddie carefully opened it, and we started to read. The journal belonged to someone named Elsie, who had lived in a cabin nearby many years ago. She wrote about the same things we were seeing: the glowing mushrooms, the blue marks, and the strange music. Elsie believed the mushrooms were alive, not just plants, but something smarter. She said they could remember things, even people, and that the fog was their way of talking to the world. Elsie's last entry was the scariest. She wrote, "The mushrooms are spreading faster now. The music is everywhere. I think they want to become part of us, to share their memories. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. If you find this, be careful. Don't let the fog inside." Maddie closed the journal, her hands shaking. "What does she mean, don't let the fog inside?" she whispered. I didn't know, but I felt a cold shiver run down my back. The fog was thicker than ever, and the music was growing louder, almost like it was calling our names. We both knew we were in the middle of something much bigger and much stranger than we had ever imagined. We left the old tree with the journal in Maddie's backpack. The fog was so thick now that we could barely see the path in front of us. The music was everywhere, almost like it was coming from inside our own heads. I tried to remember what Elsie had written. Don't let the fog inside. But I didn't know how to stop it. As we walked back toward my cabin, Maddie started to stumble. She pressed her hand to her forehead and said, "Everything feels fuzzy, like I'm half asleep." I felt it too. My arms and legs were heavy, and my thoughts kept drifting away like they were getting lost in the mist. We finally made it back to the porch. The blue marks were spreading, crawling up the walls and across the windows. The tiny mushrooms were everywhere, glowing brighter than ever. I wanted to scrape them away, but I was too tired. Maddie sat on the steps, her eyes half closed. "I keep hearing voices in the music," she whispered. "They sound sad." I sat down next to her, trying to stay awake. I flipped through the journal, looking for anything that might help us. One page caught my eye. Elsie had drawn a picture of the mushrooms, with lines reaching out from them like roots, connecting to the fog and to people's faces. Underneath, she had written, "They remember everything. They want to share it." I looked at Maddie. "Maybe the mushrooms are trying to talk to us," I said quietly. "Maybe they're not trying to hurt us. Maybe they just want us to listen." Maddie nodded slowly. "But how do we listen without getting lost?" I didn't have an answer. The fog pressed against the windows, and the music grew louder, almost like it was inside the cabin now. I felt a strange mix of fear and sadness, like I was on the edge of understanding something important, but also dangerous. We sat there together, holding the journal, waiting for the fog to clear or for the music to finally tell us what it wanted. The fog didn't clear that night. In fact, it pressed even closer, wrapping around the cabin and making everything outside look blurry and strange. Maddie and I tried to stay awake, but the music in the air made our eyelids heavy. It was almost like a lullaby, but not a comforting one. It made us feel lost and a little scared. I kept reading Elsie's journal, hoping for a clue. There was one last entry that caught my eye. It said, "If you listen with your heart and not just your ears, you'll understand. The mushrooms remember the people who walked here before. Us. They want to share their stories so they're not forgotten." I looked at Maddie. "Maybe we have to let them show us," I said softly. "Maybe that's what the music is for." Maddie nodded, but she looked nervous. "What if we get stuck? What if we can't come back?" I didn't know what to say. I was scared too, but I felt like we had come too far to stop now. The blue marks on the walls seemed to glow even brighter, almost like they were pulsing with the music. We sat together, holding hands. I closed my eyes and tried to listen, not just with my ears, but with my whole self. At first, all I heard was the humming. But then slowly, I started to feel something else. It was like memories, flashes of people walking these woods long ago, laughing, crying, living their lives. I saw Elsie planting flowers by her cabin, a little boy chasing fireflies, an old man carving his name into a tree. Maddie squeezed my hand. "I see them too," she whispered. The music grew softer, almost gentle. The fear faded a little, replaced by a deep sadness. and a strange kind of peace. It felt like the mushrooms and the fog were sharing their memories with us, trusting us to remember for them. When I opened my eyes, the fog outside was still thick, but it didn't feel as scary anymore. The blue marks on the walls seemed softer, almost friendly. Maddie and I sat quietly, holding on to the stories we'd been shown, not sure what would happen next, but feeling a little less alone. The next morning, the fog was still there, but it wasn't as thick. I could see the shapes of trees outside, and the blue marks on the porch weren't spreading anymore. Maddie and I felt tired, but not as scared. It was like the forest had calmed down a little after sharing its memories with us. We made some breakfast and sat at the table, talking quietly about what we'd seen and felt. Maddie said she still heard the music, but now it sounded softer, like a gentle song in the background. I felt it too, a kind of humming in my chest, but it didn't make me afraid anymore. We decided to go back outside and check on the mushrooms. The circles were still there, glowing faintly in the daylight. When we walked closer, I noticed that the mushrooms seemed to lean toward us, almost like they were listening. Maddie knelt down and touched one gently. She smiled and said, "It's warm." I remembered what Elsie wrote about the mushrooms wanting to share their stories. I wondered if other people had ever listened to them before, or if Maddie and I were the first. It made me feel special, but also a little nervous. As we walked through the woods, we saw more blue marks, but now they looked more like drawings than stains, shapes of animals, trees, and even faces. It was like the forest was telling its story in pictures, not just music. Suddenly we heard voices coming from the main trail. 2 men in uniforms were walking toward us. They looked serious and a little worried. One of them said, "We've had reports of strange things in the woods. Are you two all right?" Maddie and I looked at each other. We didn't know what to say. Would anyone believe what really happened? I just nodded and said, "We're okay. We were just listening." The men looked at us strangely, but they didn't ask any more questions. As they walked away, Maddie squeezed my hand. "Do you think the forest will be all right now?" she asked. I looked around at the glowing mushrooms and the gentle blue marks. "I think it will," I said, hoping I was right. But deep down, I knew the forest would always have its secrets, some meant to be shared and some meant to stay hidden. The days that followed felt different. The fog still came and went, but it didn't feel as heavy or scary anymore. Maddie. And I kept going back to the old tree and the mushroom circles. We listened to the music and tried to understand the stories the forest was sharing with us. One afternoon, we found a new circle of mushrooms near the river. This one was smaller, but in the middle was something we hadn't seen before. A tiny wooden figure carved to look like a person. It was old and smooth from years of rain and wind. Maddie picked it up and smiled. "I think the forest is giving us a gift," she said. We brought the little figure back to my cabin and put it on the windowsill. That night, the music in the air sounded happier, almost playful. I could feel the difference, like the forest was thanking us for listening and not being afraid. But there were still moments when the woods felt tense, like something was watching from the shadows. Sometimes, when I walked alone, I saw shapes moving in the corner of my eye or heard whispers in the fog. I tried not to let it scare me. I remembered Elsie's words, "Don't let the fog inside." I knew now she meant not to let fear take over. Maddie kept drawing what she saw. Her sketchbook was full of pictures, mushrooms, trees, faces in the bark, and swirling blue marks. She showed them to me, and we talked about what they might mean. We both felt like we were part of something bigger now, like the forest trusted us with its secrets. One evening, just before sunset, Maddie and I sat on the porch, watching the fog roll in. The blue marks on the cabin glowed softly in the fading light. I felt calm, even though I knew the woods would always be a little strange and mysterious. "We'll keep listening," I said quietly. Maddie nodded, her eyes shining in the dusk. And as the music drifted through the air, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. A few days later, Maddie and I woke up to find the fog was gone. The air was clear and bright, and sunlight poured through the trees. It felt strange after so many days of mist and shadows. I stepped outside and took a deep breath, feeling the warmth on my face. The blue marks on the cabin were fading, and the mushrooms didn't glow as much in the daylight. Maddie joined me on the porch, holding her sketchbook. "It feels different today," she said softly, "like the forest is resting." We decided to take a walk, just to see what had changed. The woods looked normal again, but we still noticed little things. Tiny mushrooms in the grass, faint blue marks on tree trunks, and every now and then a soft hum in the air. It was quieter, but the magic was still there if you paid attention. As we walked, Maddie told me about a dream she'd had. She dreamed she was walking through the woods, but the trees were whispering to her, telling her stories about the people who had come before us. She said the voices sounded happy, not sad. I liked that idea. Maybe the forest was at peace now, knowing someone was listening. We reached the old tree and stood there for a while. The small door was still there, but the key was gone. It felt like the end of a chapter, but not the end of the story. I touched the bark and felt a gentle warmth, almost like the tree was saying thank you. On the way back to the cabin, we saw the two men in uniforms again. They waved at us and asked if everything was all right. I smiled and said, "Yes, everything's okay now." They seemed relieved and walked away, probably thinking we were just two people who loved the woods a little too much. That night, as the sun set and the sky turned pink and gold, Maddie and I sat on the porch and listened. The music was still there, soft and far away, but it felt like a friend now instead of something to fear. I knew the forest would always have its secrets, but I also knew we'd always be part of its story. As the days passed, life in the woods slowly returned to normal. Maddie and I kept our routine. Morning walks, checking the trails, and listening for the soft music that sometimes drifted through the trees. The forest felt calmer now, but every once in a while we'd find a new blue mark or a tiny mushroom, growing in a place we hadn't seen before. It was like the woods wanted to remind us that its secrets were still there, just waiting to be noticed. One afternoon, Maddie brought over a painting she'd finished. It showed the old tree, the circles of mushrooms and the swirling fog, but in her picture, everything looked peaceful. The faces in the bark were smiling, and the blue marks glowed gently, like little lights in the night. She hung the painting in my cabin right above the fireplace. Every time I looked at it, I felt a little braver. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear the music again, soft, almost like a lullaby. I'd lie there and listen, feeling safe instead of scared. I wondered if Elsie, the woman from the journal, had ever felt this way before she disappeared. Maybe she had, and maybe she was part of the forest now, her memories living on in the mushrooms and the fog. Maddie and I talked about telling other people what we'd seen, but we decided to keep it our secret for now. We didn't want anyone to come looking for answers and end up lost in the mist. The woods had trusted us, and we wanted to respect that. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned deep blue, Maddie and I sat on the porch, side by side. The air was cool, and the last bit of fog curled around the trees like a soft blanket. I looked at Maddie and smiled. "We'll always remember, won't we?" She nodded. "Always." The music played quietly in the background, and I knew that, even if the rest of the world never believed our story, the forest would remember us, just like we remembered it. My name is Bobby Littlefeather. I'm a park ranger in the Gila National Forest, way out in New Mexico. Most days, I wake up before the sun, my head pounding from too much whiskey the night before. I tell myself I'll quit drinking, but every morning, the bottle calls to me. I try to ignore it as I climb the old wooden steps up to the lookout tower. The air up here is dry and sharp. The land stretches out forever. Dusty hills, twisted trees, and canyons that look like giant cracks. In the earth, it's been a bad year for rain. Everything is thirsty. The forest feels tired, like it's waiting for something to happen. I sit in the tower, scanning the horizon for smoke. That's my job, watching for wildfires before they get out of control. But sometimes, when I look out over the land, I see more than just the trees and rocks. I see memories. Some are mine. Some I think belong to someone else. When I was a kid, I saw something in the fire. Not just shapes or shadows, but a figure made of burning light. It spoke my name, clear as day. I told my family, but they said it was just a dream, just my imagination. But I know what I saw. The scars on my chest, the ones shaped like a twisted branch, came from that night. I never told anyone how I really got them. Now, every time I touch the cold glass window of the lookout tower, I get this strange feeling, like the world is shifting. One morning, I pressed my hand to the glass and blinked. For a second, the forest outside wasn't the same. The trees looked younger, the ground was bare, and smoke curled up from a camp that shouldn't be there. It was like I was seeing the past just for a heartbeat, before everything snapped back to normal. That day, I found a patch of burned grass near the tower. The pattern in the ashes matched the scars on my chest. My hands shook as I knelt down, tracing the lines with my finger. Something deep inside me woke up. A memory, or maybe a warning. I knew then that the fire wasn't finished with me. It was only just beginning. I tried to forget about the burned grass and the strange feeling in my chest, but it followed me everywhere. At night, I would sit in my small cabin at the edge of the forest, staring at the bottle on the table. I told myself I needed it to sleep, but I knew that wasn't true. The truth was, I used the whiskey to push away the memories and the fear. Some nights I would wake up sweating, my heart pounding, the smell of smoke in my nose. I'd look out the window, half expecting to see flames in the trees. But the forest would be dark and quiet, the only sound the wind moving through the branches. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. One evening, I was sitting on the steps of my cabin, watching the sun go down. The sky was painted with orange and pink, but I couldn't enjoy it. My hands were shaking, so I wrapped them around my mug of coffee, hoping the warmth would calm me down. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps on the dry leaves behind me. I turned quickly, my heart jumping. There was nothing there, just the empty forest, shadows stretching long and thin. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. I could feel eyes on me, just out of sight. I stood up and walked toward the trees, calling out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice sounded small in the big, quiet woods. No one answered. I waited, listening, but all I heard was the wind. I went back inside and locked the door, feeling silly but also scared. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a fox, but deep down I knew it was something else. The same thing that left the scars on my chest and burned the pattern in the grass. That night, I didn't drink. I wanted to keep my mind clear just in case. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps. The forest was calm, but I couldn't relax. I knew the fire was coming for me again. I just didn't know when. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was just starting to rise, making the sky look pink and soft. I felt tired, but I didn't want to stay in bed. I put on my ranger hat and boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh, but I still felt that strange heaviness in my chest. I decided to walk back to the spot where I found the burned grass. Maybe I'd find something I missed before. The forest was quiet, except for the crunch of leaves under my feet. As I got closer, I noticed something new. A small feather, black as night, lying in the middle of the ashes. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. It felt warm, almost like it had just come from a fire. Suddenly, I heard a whisper, soft as the wind. It sounded like my name. Bobby. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart started to race. I looked at the feather again, and for a second it seemed to glow with a faint orange light, like an ember. I put the feather in my pocket and hurried back to the lookout tower. I climbed up and looked out over the forest. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I kept thinking about the feather and the voice. Was I going crazy, or was something really happening out here? I tried to distract myself by doing my usual checks, radioing the other rangers, writing in my logbook and scanning the trees for smoke. But my eyes kept drifting back to the spot where I found the feather. I felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As the day went on, the sky grew cloudy. The wind picked up, rattling the windows of the tower. I watched as the shadows grew longer and the light faded. I felt alone, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of alone that makes your skin crawl, like you're being watched by something. You can't see. That night I kept the feather by my bed. I hoped it would help me understand what was going on, but as I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper again, closer this time. Bobby! My heart pounded, and I knew the forest was trying to tell me something. I just didn't know what. The next day, I felt different. It was like I was carrying a secret, but I didn't even know what it was. I kept the black feather in my pocket, touching it every now and then, just to make sure it was real. I didn't tell anyone about it. I wasn't sure what I would even say. I went about my usual work, checking the trails, clearing fallen branches, and making notes in my little notebook. But everywhere I went, I felt like I was walking through a memory. The trees seemed older. The rocks seemed to remember things I didn't. Sometimes, when I blinked, I'd see flashes, quick pictures in my mind, of people dressed in old clothes, sitting around fires, talking in a language I didn't understand. At lunchtime, I sat on a log and ate my sandwich. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. I heard a crackle behind me, like someone stepping on a twig. I turned around fast, but again, nothing was there. My hands felt shaky and my heart beat faster. I tried to calm myself by humming a song. My grandma used to sing, but the feeling didn't go away. Later, as I walked back to the lookout tower, I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the dirt, bare feet, small and light, leading off the trail and into the thickest part of the woods. I bent down to look closer. The prints looked fresh, like someone had just walked there. But I hadn't seen anyone. All day, I followed the footprints for a little while, but they disappeared near a big, old tree with twisted roots. I stood there listening. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, I thought I heard voices, soft and far away, like people talking around a campfire. I backed away slowly, feeling goosebumps on my arms. I hurried back to the tower, locking the door behind me. I sat down, holding the feather tight in my hand. I knew something strange was happening in the forest, and somehow it was connected to me. I just didn't know how or why, but I was sure of one thing. The forest was full of secrets, and they were starting to wake up. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of fire, dancing shapes and shadows moving through the trees. I heard voices too, whispering, words I didn't understand. My heart beat fast, and I kept turning over in bed trying to get comfortable. But it felt like the whole forest was awake, and I was the only one who could hear it. Just after midnight, a loud crack woke me up. I sat up in bed, listening. At first, I thought it was just a branch falling, but then I saw a strange light outside my window. It flickered like a campfire, but there shouldn't have been any fire out there. My hands shook as I grabbed my flashlight and the black feather, and I slowly opened the door. The air was cold and still. The light was coming from deep in the trees, glowing orange and gold. I walked toward it, my feet crunching on the dry leaves. Every step felt heavy, like I was moving through water. The forest was quiet, but I could hear my own breathing, loud, in my ears. As I got closer, I saw something I'll never forget. In a small clearing, a figure stood by a burning log. It looked almost human, but its skin glowed like hot coals, and its eyes were bright and wild. The figure turned and stared right at me. I froze, too scared to move or even breathe. The figure raised its hand, and I saw it was holding a feather, just like mine. It pointed at my chest, and suddenly I felt the old scars burn, hot and sharp. The pain made me gasp, but I couldn't look away. The figure started to speak, its voice crackling like firewood. I didn't understand the words, but I felt them deep inside, like they were meant for me. Then just as quickly as it appeared, the figure in the fire vanished. I was left standing alone in the dark, my heart pounding, the black feather still warm in my hand. I hurried back to my cabin, locking the door behind me. I knew now that the thing in the forest was real, and it wanted something from me. I just didn't know what. The next morning I felt weak and tired, like I hadn't slept at all. My chest still hurt where the scars were, and I kept thinking about the glowing figure in the woods. I wanted to pretend it was just a bad dream, but the black feather in my hand told me it was real. I decided to call my friend Maria, another ranger who worked a few miles away. She was the only person I trusted enough to talk to about this. When she answered the radio, I tried to sound normal, but my voice was shaky. "Hey, Maria, have you ever seen anything strange out here? Like lights in the woods or heard voices?" At night, there was a long pause. Then she answered, her voice quiet. "Sometimes my grandma used to say the forest remembers things, old things." "Why, Bobby? Did you see something?" I hesitated, then told her about the feather, the footprints, and the burning figure. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You should come to my cabin tonight. I have something to show you." All day, I felt nervous. I kept checking the windows, half expecting to see the fiery figure watching me. When the sun started to set, I grabbed my flashlight and the feather, locked up my cabin, and walked the trail to Maria's place. The forest felt even quieter than usual, like it was waiting for something. Maria met me at the door. She looked serious but not scared. She led me inside and showed me an old wooden box. Inside were feathers, stones, and little bundles of dried herbs. She told me her family had lived near this forest for generations, and they believed the land was alive, filled with spirits and memories. She took my feather and placed it next to the others. "You're part of this now, Bobby," she said. "The fire spirit is trying to tell you something. We need to listen, or the forest might get angry." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and hope. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. Maybe together we could find out what the spirit wanted and how to stop it from hurting anyone else. That night, Maria and I sat by the window, watching the forest. The moon was bright, making the trees look silver and strange. Maria made tea with some of her dried herbs and handed me a cup. It tasted earthy and a little bitter, but it helped calm my nerves. We talked quietly, sharing stories about things we'd seen and heard in the woods. Maria said her grandmother used to leave gifts for the spirits, small pieces of bread, shiny stones, or feathers, so they would protect the family and not cause trouble. She believed the fire spirit was not evil, just lonely and angry, because people had forgotten the old ways. As midnight got closer, the air in the cabin felt heavy. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows. Suddenly, the black feather on the table began to shake, moving all by itself. Maria and I stared at it, not sure what to do. Then we heard the whisper again, soft but clear. "Bobby." It sounded closer than ever, almost like it was inside the room with us. Maria grabbed my hand. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. We have to listen. The feather lifted off the table, spinning slowly in the air. The shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, and the air felt hot, like standing too close to a fire. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I felt the old pain in my chest again, sharp and burning. The whisper grew louder, turning into words I could almost understand. Maria squeezed my hand tighter. "Ask it what it wants," she said. My voice shook as I spoke. "What do you want from me?" For a moment, everything went silent. Then the whisper answered, "Remember, remember." The feather dropped to the table and the heat in the room faded. Maria and I sat there, breathing hard, our hearts racing. I didn't know exactly what the spirit wanted me to remember, but I knew it was important. The forest was trying to tell us something about the past, and I had to find out what it was before it was too late. The next morning, Maria and I walked into the forest together. The sunlight came through the trees in thin golden lines. Everything looked peaceful, but I felt nervous. I kept thinking about the voice telling me to remember. Maria led the way, carrying her box of feathers and stones. She said we needed to go back to the place where I found the burned grass. Maybe the spirit would show us something there. As we walked, I noticed how quiet the forest was. Even the birds seemed to be hiding. When we reached the burned patch, Maria knelt down and placed the black feather in the center. She closed her eyes and whispered something in her family's old language. I stood beside her, feeling the scars on my chest start to tingle again. Suddenly, the air grew warmer. The sunlight seemed to flicker like firelight. I blinked, and for a moment the forest around us changed. I saw people dressed in animal skins, sitting around a big fire. They were singing and passing a bowl from hand to hand. One of them looked right at me. His eyes were bright and sad, and he had a scar on his chest just like mine. I gasped and stepped back. The vision faded, and I was standing in the forest again, with Maria watching me closely. "What did you see?" she asked. I told her about the people, the fire, and the man with the scar. Maria nodded. "That was your ancestor," she said softly. "The spirit wants you to remember where you come from. Maybe it needs your help to finish something that started a long time ago." I felt a mix of fear and wonder. The forest wasn't just full of trees and animals. It was full of memories, mine, my family's, and maybe even the spirits. I knew now that I couldn't run from it. I had to face whatever was coming, no matter how scared I was. That afternoon, Maria and I sat quietly at the edge of the burned patch, thinking about what to do next. The vision of my ancestor stayed in my mind. I kept seeing his sad eyes and the scar on his chest that matched mine. It made me feel connected to him, even though I didn't know his name. Maria said we should try to talk to the spirit again, but this time we needed to show respect. She pulled out a small loaf of bread and a shiny stone from her box. She placed them next to the feather in the ashes. "These are gifts," she explained. "We're asking for help and showing we want peace." We sat cross-legged on the ground, holding hands. Maria began to hum softly, a song her grandmother had taught her. I closed my eyes and listened. The wind moved through the trees, and the air grew warmer again, just like before. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I opened my eyes and saw the glowing figure from the night before, standing right in front of me. It didn't look angry this time. Its eyes were gentle, and it nodded slowly as if it understood. The figure pointed to the burned patch, then to my chest. I realized it wanted me to kneel down and touch the ground. My hands shook, but I did as it asked. The moment my fingers touched the ashes, a rush of memories filled my head. Old fires, families gathered together, and a promise made long ago to protect the forest from harm. Tears filled my eyes. I understood now. My ancestor had promised to keep the forest safe, but something had gone wrong. The spirit was waiting for someone to remember that promise and finish what had been started. The figure faded away. leaving me and Maria alone in the quiet woods. I felt scared, but I also felt stronger. I knew what I had to do. I had to keep the promise and protect the forest, no matter what it took. As the sun began to set, Maria and I packed up her box and walked back to my cabin. The sky was turning, orange and purple, and the air felt heavy like a storm was coming. I kept thinking about the promise my ancestor made. It felt big and important, and I wasn't sure how I could keep it. But I knew I had to try. That night I couldn't eat much. My mind was racing with questions. What if I failed? What if the spirit got angry again? Maria sat with me at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She told me not to be afraid, that the spirit had chosen me for a reason. After it got dark, we heard the wind pick up outside. The trees creaked and groaned, and every now and then I thought I saw a flicker of orange light between the branches. Maria said it was time to go back to the burn spot just one more time. She said we needed to do a small ceremony to show the spirit we understood the promise and were ready to protect the forest. We walked through the darkness with only our flashlights and the sound of our footsteps. When we reached the burned patch, Maria handed me the black feather. "This is yours now," she said. "It's a sign you're the new firekeeper." I knelt down and placed the feather in the ashes. Maria sprinkled some of her dried herbs over it and whispered a prayer. I closed my eyes and promised out loud to watch over the forest, to keep it safe from fire and harm, just like my ancestor had tried to do. The wind suddenly stopped. The air felt warm and calm. For a moment, I thought I saw the glowing figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching us with a gentle smile. Then it faded away, and the forest was quiet again. Maria squeezed my shoulder. "You did it, Bobby," she said. "The spirit knows you're ready." I felt a deep sense of peace, but also a new kind of responsibility. The forest was counting on me now, and I wouldn't let it down. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel scared or tired. I felt strong, like I belonged here. I looked out the window and saw the forest covered in soft golden light. It was quiet, but not in a lonely way. It felt peaceful, like the trees were resting. I made some breakfast and packed a small bag with water, my notebook, and the black feather. I wanted to walk the trails and see if anything had changed. Maria had gone back to her own cabin, but she promised to check in on me later. As I walked through the woods, I noticed little things I hadn't seen before. There were fresh deer tracks by the stream and a family of birds building a nest in a low branch. The burned patch from before looked different too. New green shoots were poking up through the ashes, like the forest was healing itself. I stopped for a while and sat on a big rock, listening to the sounds around me. The wind in the trees, the chirping of birds, even the distant sound of water flowing. I thought about my ancestor and the promise he made. I thought about the spirit and how it had watched over this place for so long. Suddenly, I heard a crackling sound like firewood snapping. My heart jumped, but I didn't run. I stood up and looked around. In the distance, I saw a small, safe campfire burning near the edge of the woods. A group of hikers were sitting around it, laughing and sharing stories. I walked over to them and made sure their fire was safe and under control. As I talked with them, I realized this was part of my job now, not just watching for danger, but helping people understand how to respect the forest. I showed them how to put out their fire the right way and told them a little about the history of these woods. When I walked back to my cabin, I felt proud. I knew the forest was safer and I knew I was keeping my promise. The spirit hadn't appeared again, but I felt its presence all around me, calm and warm like sunlight through the trees. I was the firekeeper now, and I was ready for whatever came next. A few days passed, and life in the forest settled into a new kind of quiet. I kept busy, walking the trails every morning and checking for signs of trouble. I still carried the black feather with me, tucked safely in my shirt pocket. Sometimes I would touch it and remember the glowing figure, the promise, and the feeling of being chosen. One afternoon, as I was clearing branches from a path, I heard a strange sound, like someone crying softly. I followed the noise and found a young boy sitting on a fallen log, his face buried in his hands. He looked lost and scared. I knelt down beside him and spoke gently. "Hey there, are you okay? Are you lost?" He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I can't find my parents. We were hiking and I got turned around. I offered him some water and told him not to worry, that I'd help him find his family." As we walked back toward the main trail, I noticed he kept glancing at the trees, like he was listening for something. After a while, we heard voices calling his name. I called back, and soon his parents came running. They hugged him tight, thanking me over and over. As they walked away, the boy turned and looked at me. For a second, I thought I saw a warm, orange light in his eyes, just like the spirits. He smiled and waved before disappearing into the trees with his family. That night, as I sat on my cabin steps, I thought about everything that had happened. The forest felt different now, more alive, but also calmer. I realized the spirit wasn't just watching over me, it was watching over everyone who loved and respected the land. I looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet thank you to the spirit, to my ancestor, and to the forest itself. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew I was ready. I was the fire keeper, and I would protect this place for as long as I could.